All right. So today's agenda I'm going to cover is we're going to do some 1v1. I'm going to talk about the difference between 1v1 and the multiplayer list and why those changes are in place. And I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to run through some games. And then at the end, I'll have a bonus section if there's time. And I think there should be, in which I talk about where my Highlander deck is, and if I can find some games, I'll run you through some games with the Highlander deck as well, just as a special little tack on the end. It seems like there's some interest in Highlander, but I don't want it to be the focus of the channel necessarily, because I realize that's not what everyone's here for. However, if I can get some more opponents, more of you interested, and you pop on and we can get some games going, then I find the format to be very interesting, actually, and it's very fun to play. So it would be great to have some opponents like that to give me some more content, and then I'll move the Highlander stuff into like its own section of the channel. But for now, it's this kind of a bonus thing I'm tacking on the end of the video. So that's the agenda. We'll start with the 1v1 list, and then we'll make our way there. So I don't want to overdo too much, but basically there's a few key differences between 1v1 and the multiplayer list. In 1v1, there are 4 cards that are banned, that some of which really matter, some of which semi do. So the 4 cards that are banned are Winter Orb, which is a huge deal, Strip Mine, which is meaningful, Mind Twist, which isn't that big of a deal, it matters, and then Sensei's Divining Top, which really doesn't matter that much at all and doesn't make a lot of sense to me, honestly, but you know, it's a nice card to have, but so what? So those are the 4 cards that are banned. And then in 1v1, there's a card that's legal, that's not legal in the multiplayer list, that matters a lot, and that card is Limited Resources. So Winter Orb is the card that matters the most between the two. And the reason Winter Orb was in the deck to begin with, and the deck really is built around Winter Orb. It has a lot of ways to cheat the orb. For example, Treachery to untap your lands, Teferi to repeatedly do it, Urza to tap the Winter Orb so you get all your lands, you tap it on your opponent's turn and get all your lands back on your turn, Sword of Feast and Famine to get your lands out from under the orb. And then a bunch of alternate mana sources. So the thing is, that's how the multiplayer list is built around Winter Orb, and then of course you've got a bunch of ways to tutor for it. However, the reason for that originally was that the card that was very popular was Maelstrom Wanderer. So Maelstrom Wanderer and cards along the lines of that, as well as the other card that used to be popular was, you'd see it a lot, was Kozilek. So you have these commanders that would, upon being cast, do something horrible, and then they were also very powerful in their own right, so you couldn't just leave them in play and ignore them. It wasn't like they were 1/1s, right? And then so you'd have to deal with the commander while getting punished for your opponent just merely playing them. And then once you dealt with the commander, you force the card back into a zone that your opponent can then play it from again and repunish you. And that would happen over and over and over till you lost. If you didn't lose the first time, you lose the second, you lose the third, eventually you lose, right? And that's such a miserable experience. In the beginning, the solution was actually not that we implemented Brian and I, when we were first approaching the format, was not actually Winter Orb. The solution we implemented was tuck effects. So we had cards that there's cards like Bant Charm that could put a creature on the bottom of their owner's library. Condemn could do it, and there were a couple of counter spells that could allow you to counter a spell and put it on the bottom of your opponent's library. And in fact, one of those counter spells actually came out in the commander set. It was a card that you blue 1, you counter target spell, and you could just put it on top or bottom of its owner's library, and then after you did it, you shuffled it, or you put the counterspell, also on the bottom of your library, so you could repeatedly solve their commander's problem, the problem of that recurring commander. And so they put it in the set specifically understanding that the solution to commanders was to tuck them. They also printed Terminus. Terminus was another solution. So there were a lot of cards getting printed that were designed around tucking the commander, because that's how you solve the problem in the beginning, or at least that's how we were solving the problem, and a lot of people in the community were solving the problem. So I think, so what ended up happening was that the commander team didn't like how easily the commanders were being solved, I guess. I have to assume that's what the deal was. Notably, however, I will say this. Some of the solutions were lopsided, like blue had solutions, white had solutions, red had a little bit of solutions, black didn't have much, and green didn't have much, so they needed to print more tuck effects in black and green. But before that happened, the commander team changed the rules, and they said tuck doesn't work on commanders anymore unless the person whose commander is affected decides to allow it to happen. And that changed the nature of commander, and suddenly that had to go. And so we had to look around and say, well, how else can we stop losing to these battle cruiser commanders that beat you by being cast, regardless of whether or not you counter them? So one solution is to steal the commander so that you have control of it, so that it can stop hitting, so it can stop being cast. So cards like Treachery and Vedalken Shackles are good, but then they printed a land where you tap it and you can actually gain control of all creatures that belong to you. So then they printed a land like that actually solved that problem, because we started playing more and more control magic effects. And so this land got printed, and there's lots of ways to fetch lands, and it started showing up everywhere, and that didn't solve the problem. So the next question was, okay, how do I solve the problem of getting smashed in the face by repeated castings of commanders that trigger on activation? And the answer is, don't let it happen in the first place. How do you do that? You attack their mana. So Winter Orb is the premier mana attacking card in the format, and so Winter Orb ended up being the focus of Breya. Well, in 1v1, I'm back to this, okay, how do I solve this problem again? And of course, Treachery and Shackles work to some extent, although it's quite hard to Shackles a card like Kozilek, right? But the actual solution, thankfully, because it's not banned in 1v1, while Winter Orb is limited resources. Limited resources is how you can stop them, hopefully, from crushing you with these gross commanders that basically take advantage of the commander. They take advantage of the way commander works to kind of hammer you with rules abuse, like replaying the commander over and over and over till you lose. It's not rules abuse, but it's kind of it's a different way of winning that's not available in other formats, and it's just something you have to adapt to. And so this was our adaptation to that. All right, so that's one of the big deals. Now, when you play limited resources instead of Winter Orb, it changes things, because limited resources wants different. It rewards, and you cheat it in different ways. Winter Orb, on the other hand, has its own series of like cheats and workarounds. So what it comes down to is certain cards are just not as good in a limited resources deck as they are in a Winter Orb deck. So one example of that is that in the 1v1 list right now, anyway, and this is all tentative, this is in the multiplayer list rather, it's all tentative in the fully powered version, right? So Winter Orb's in the deck. So a card that works really well with Winter Orb is this guy right here, Lotus Field. Because what you can do is just sacrifice a couple of tapped lands, and then after that, you're untapping a hexproof 3 mana per turn land as your 1 land per turn. It's insanely powerful. It's basically a 0 mana Gilded Lotus, right, under these conditions. And while Lotus Field isn't great for Breya, typically because in the early game, Breya wants 4 different colors of mana, not 3 of the same, it does allow you to cast Necropotence and Cryptic Command very well, very easily. Of course, it has some light combo potential with something like Teferi as well, or Sword of Feast and Famine. But the main thing it's also not good with Vedalken Shackles, incidentally. But it's just, the deck's built around Winter Orb, and it's such a good Winter Orb cheat that in the multiplayer list, I use Lotus Field. There is also a combo potential with Brought Back, incidentally. You go land, and which produce white, and then on turn 3 you tap 2 white, play Lotus Field, sack the 2 lands, brought them back immediately into play, and you've just gone from 2 mana at the beginning of your turn to starting your next turn with 6, potentially, if you have a land drop, right? Which, ramping from 2 to 6 is probably game over, honestly. So Lotus Field, extremely good with Winter Orb, And so what this card does is it actually takes the slot of a card that this card, which helps you to cast Necropotence, takes a slot of a card that helps you to cast Necropotence in the 1v1 list, which replaces Lotus Field, and we'll hit that right now. And that card is the card I was using in the past, which is Urborg. And so the reason that Urborg is more valuable to me than Lotus Field in this deck is that Lotus Field limited resources is terrible, right? The goal here is to get up to 5 lands so that you can force your opponent to no longer be able to play lands as quickly as possible. And Lotus Field works completely backwards to that. So while it's a total combo with Winter Orb, which is what the first deck's focused on, it's a nombo with limited resources, which is what the second deck's focused on. So we don't want that in here. So we use instead Urborg to allow us to cheat Necropotence, or to easily cast Necropotence when we don't have something like an actual Lotus, a Guild of Lotus in play. So something that we can expedition map for to solve the how do I cast Necropotence question. And so Urborg fits that bill. Now, secondly, there's another land. Remember, Strip Mine is banned. So in the 1v1 list, I actually have right now, because the land base is super tight, I actually have Badlands sitting here as a way to go get red or black off of a Wooded Foothills or a Verdant Catacombs. Because without this card, Verdant cannot get red, Wooded cannot get black. Yeah, I had it right. And Verdant cannot get red. So with Badlands, these two cards can get any color of mana. However, in the multiplayer list, I had to make a cut somewhere to fit a Strip Mine into the deck. And initially I had cut Throne of the High City, but later quickly realized that's foolish. The card Throne of the High City is just totally ridiculous. When you play against a primarily blue deck, like a mono blue deck that's all about just endless countering, there's two cards that really make their life tough and that you want to have. Cavern of Souls being the first one, naming human, so you can push your Breya out, and Throne of the High City being the second one, because typically they can interact on the board and they can't stop Throne of the High City, and once you're drawing 2 cards per turn, then you just run them out of counters and eventually you beat them. So it needs to be in the deck. I had to cut something, so I actually pulled out the Badlands. It sucks because these fetches are just a little bit weaker. However, I don't want to cut Cephalid Colosseum, which is another option because it's way too strong with Narset and creates like a nasty lock. And of course, mid-game, sometimes you just fix your hand with it. And there's really not much else that I could feasibly cut here. They're all fetches, they're all dual lands, and they'll have their purpose. So that's a significant difference, I think, between 1v1 and the multiplayer list is just having that actually slightly better mana base in the 1v1 build in some way, which is a little bit weaker, but a much more powerful effect in the form of Strip Mine in the multiplayer list. Now, the other card that's different is Sensei's Divining Top is legal here. We're just going to play it. And the other thing to keep in mind is while the mana base is a little bit weaker because no Badlands, Sensei's Divining Top is a little bit better at fixing your mana early, so it kind of like balances out to some degree. So that's in there, and then the other card that's in here is Fragmentize, which you want to be killing. So the deal with Fragmentize and Vandal Blast both being in the multiplayer list is if I'm in a bad spot where my opponent sneaks out a Winter Orb and I need to climb out from under it, I can untap a single land, and with a Fragmentize or Vandal Blast, I can do exactly that. So it's a nod to the fact that Winter Orb is in the format. However, in the 1v1 list, I don't need Fragmentize because Winter Orb is not here. I don't need a 1-mana solution, but Vandal Blast has its own value of, the overload effect, or, killing a first turn Soul Ring, so I'm leaving that. And instead, I'm just running Flame Slash. Flame Slash is just one of those cards that, it could be Bolt, it could be Thoughtseize, it could be Serum Visions. It's basically replacing Sensei's Divining Top in some sense. But Flame Slash is just one of those cards where you really want, there are a number of commanders with 4 toughness specifically that you really want to take down, and Flame Slash is just really compact and does it's almost Swords to Plowshares for a creature at sorcery speed, because it'll kill Kess, it'll kill Breya, although it won't kill the tokens, obviously, but it'll take out Breya, it'll take out Psy, Master Thopterist, it'll take out a handful of other commanders. And while Lightning Bolt is a better card overall, in a 30 life format, you're unlikely to bolt your opponent's face, and so that function of the bolt doesn't matter as much. It's more of a question of, do you want the flexibility to possibly bolt a Planeswalker, and of course have a card you can play at instant speed, which you can fetch with, say, Mystical Teachings, or would you rather just have the more compact removal card, kills like Serendib Freets and Sengir Vampires, and nobody plays these cards anymore, but you get my drift, right? Like, it kills higher end, bigger threats. And ultimately, when you trade a 1-for-1 card with your opponent, when you take one card like Source of Plowshares and point it at one of their other cards, for a single mana, the removal of a card that costs more mana means that your mana efficiency compared to your opponent, you're using 1 mana to solve like a 4 mana threat, so you're getting a 3 mana advantage in tempo. And Flame Slash will generate more of those tempo advantages, like scenarios, because of the targets, I think. And so based on that, I think I'd rather have the Flame Slash, so that's why that's in there. So that's another difference. And then, and as it turns out, so Flame Slash is actually holding the slot where the Fragmentize was. And then for the Sensei's Divining Top slot, I mentioned that this was the top. It's actually the Fragmentize. And for the top slot, I actually have Search for Iskanta. It's another card that allows you to manipulate the top of your library. But here's the other thing with Search for Iskanta. It's pretty terrible when it flips in a Winter Orb scenario, because you have to use artifact. If you're untapping just this land and then pumping a bunch of artifact mana into it, it's not that bad, but you're still not getting ahead. Like with the Winter Orb out, you only get to untap 1 land per turn, so you're stuck forever relying on artifact mana and never getting to untap more than, you just keep sitting on this 1 land, like, unless you're cheating the Orb with Feast and Famine and stuff, in which case it's just broken and you probably won. Anyway, so yeah, it's not very good with Winter Orb. However, with limited resources, on the other hand, it's fantastic, because you can actually have a limited resources in play with 5 lands, play a Search for Iskanta, flip it, and now you've got your 6th mana source in play. You can spend 4 of them to draw an extra card, leaving you with exactly 2 up, which means you have a counter spell up, and that's with no artifact mana involved at all. Also, at six lands, you can cast Breya and use it, or cast Breya for the second time. So there's a big difference between 5 and 6, and Search for Iskanta will get you there just 1 extra step. Of course, you don't want to flip it before you play the limited resources if you can help it, but if you can time it correctly, it just pushes you that far ahead. And that being said, if you're in a race to run out limited resources, for example, your opponent's stumbling on mana, or you can get to where your opponent has 4 lands in play, and you play your 5th land, and then you flip Search for Iskanta, like so that you play your 5th land, and then you're able to play limited resources. Let me back up here. Your opponent plays their 4th land. You have 4 lands in a search, which you flip into 5. You can play a limited resources and play a land for the turn after the fact, which takes you up to 6 lands, and your opponent has 4, and then you've actually pinned your opponent down on 4 lands because you had this little rampant growth effect. So that's another. So it plays terribly with Winter Orb and extremely well with limited resources. So it's a perfect replacement for Sensei's Divining Top in this deck, where it just doesn't make the cut in the Winter Orb deck. So those are all the differences. Hopefully, I haven't belabored the point too much, but at any rate, we're going to move on, and I'm going to run you through these games, and you'll see in the games that there are some cards that I was testing that aren't in here right now. Wishclaw Talisman is one of them. I really like Wishclaw Talisman, but I just can't quite get myself to play it. I don't know, maybe you guys will have some suggestions and stuff, but at one time it was in there, and you'll see in these games how that works. So we'll go into results, all results, date and time. We'll do last 7 days. And then you'll see that in the 1v1 fights that I've had in the last 7 days, well, actually I've had exactly one loss, and I had one loss in this is freeform is Highlander, which we'll get to in a bit. And then other than those two losses, I actually haven't lost anything else at all in either format. So it's been going pretty well. But yeah, we'll run through these 1v1 games, talk about why that loss happened, and then if at the end I'm going to tack on these Highlander games, and I'll show you that deck list too. So stick around. But for now, let's get into some gameplay. So this was on, how long ago was this? This was on the 11th. So I'm going to run through quite a few games here, and the deck list is somewhat different. So now my opponent, Michael Randy, is playing Atla Polani Nest Tender. It's one of those cards that this is one of those cards that I call I'm firing my lasers, because this card has an insane windup before it's finally ever good. You can see I still had Fragmentize here. It turns out to be fine there. I mean, I killed an artifact. It's never going to do anything, but then my opponent plays Chromatic Lantern instead of a Flame Slash, which would have been fine, or a Lightning Bolt, which would have been nice to kill his commander if it ever comes down, but that's fine. Anyway, so I'm just going to spin out here a bunch of cards as quickly as I can and go ahead and kill a Reflecting Pool. My opponent runs out a Rook Egg. So this is a kind of not serious, right? Anyway, I'm just doing gross stuff over here while my opponent is playing Rook Egg, and the game ends. Basically, I have active Weathered Wayfarer, which quite often is game over if Weathered Wayfarer just sits there and play doing what it needs to do. Typically, it's mostly a game over in the multiplayer list where you're able to get both Strip and Wasteland, and then eventually go get Throne of the High City. But even in 1v1, the fact that you can Wasteland them, get a Workshop, Throne of the High City them, or an Ancient Tomb, fix your mana, like, it does way too much and it cannot sit active, and as you saw, it just made the rest of my hand so much stronger. Anyway, but my next game against R. Foister here, he's playing Teferi, so I assume this is a much more serious game. I've got an excellent start, though. I've got Dark Confidant, which is, against blue, going first is just such a problem for them. So I'm going to attempt Soul Ring here. It lands. Another problem card for blue. Confidant lands. Opponent is in big, big trouble here. And does not have anything, has a Sapphire Medallion, which is pretty powerful. You can see I have Wish Claw here, so we'll get to see how that works. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just run out a ton of mana. And for now, I'm going to play both Doretti and the Wish Claw, and then I'm going to go ahead and kill their Sapphire. And I mean, at this point, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana in play to my opponent's 2. Multiple card drawing, multiple removal, super over. But I'm going to go ahead and really make it over by cloning the Wish Claw and then making a wish for a mana drain and attacking. I'm going to go ahead and fetch and then wish again, and the card I'm going to go get is Mind Shatter. So now if my opponent, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because I'm going to pause. I already have the ready in play, so here's the problem from my opponent. If they don't do anything with these Wish Claws, then I can slowly tick up and then just destroy them. And I got 2 Demonic Tutors and they got nothing. So it'll take time, but it's something that I can do, and I can play Breya and just kill one immediately, right? So if they don't use it, but on the other hand, my opponent really wants to deal with, wanted to deal with getting the Dark Confidant off the table, so they do, but as you can see, this not great for them. So I'm trying to decide, do I want to Mind Shadow them now or not? It's 4 cards, it's too good. I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to tick up a Construct and sit on my Counterspell, not play my Confidant. So now I'm highly encouraging my opponent to use Wish Claw Talisman here. Instead, they try to draw some cards, which I stop, and find another Counterspell. So I'm going to go ahead and play Dark Confidant here. I'm going to run out Breya with a Counterspell up. I'm going to go ahead and just produce another Construct, and I'm expecting, my opponent thought he could Wish Claw at the end of my turn. He can't, which is another painful thing for my opponent to have to deal with. Finally realizes he's got to use it, goes and gets some mana, and of course, now I get 2 more tutors though, so how is this going to work for my opponent? Well, it's not. So I'm going to go get Force of Will, I'm going to go get Wasteland, Doretti, play the Wasteland and attack here. And I think, yeah, I play limited resources here, which which basically means that, so my opponent's got 4, 5, 6 lands, right? So here's the thing. By playing limited resources here, here's what I'm concerned about. One of the cards, if I was my opponent, that I would have fetched would have been, might have been a Cavern of Souls. I was thinking that they could Cavern of Souls the Teferi, but actually, with Teferi being a Planeswalker, that wouldn't have worked anyway. But with them stuck on exactly 6 lands, they can play Teferi, but they can't play any mana to protect it. And they know I have counter magic, or they should assume that I do. So they're kind of stuck here. And then by me fetching a Wasteland, what I plan to do, getting Wasteland in play before limited resources, what I plan to do is strip this off and then play a land, and then that way my opponent will be stuck on 4 mana. What I'm trying to do is lock them down under limited resources, basically. So I'm going to strip this and kill it, and watch how insane this ends up being. So I'm going to strip and kill this. They bounce on my creatures. I don't care. I'm going to fetch. Now watch what happens. I'm going to clone the Wishclaw, and then I'm fetching. Do you know which card I'm going to get? If you said Brought Back, good on you. So the reason I'm getting Brought Back here is I now Brought Back will put into play, another reason that limited resources is sick. It'll put into play Wasteland and Windswept Heath from the graveyard. So what's going to end up happening is I have 5 lands here, but then I sneak these 2 lands into play, 6, 7, and my opponent, who's stuck on 4 to my 7, can never play a 5th land because there's more than 10 lands in play. And if they don't have a card like Brought Back to cheat lands into play, well, too bad for them. And then if I go and get, and then remember, I've got 2 more Demonic Tutors waiting for me. Because of the Wishclaw, I actually Demonic Tutored 4 times, right? Because I used each of these Wishclaws twice to my opponent's 2. So he got to DT twice. I got to DT 4 times. And then I cloned it and I Demonic Tutored a 5th time. And I had a 6th and a 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10 Demonic Tutors left waiting for me this game. Like, how is my opponent going to beat that? Right? So anyway, Brought Back was going to sneak 2 more lands into play, and then if I wanted, I could get Search for Iskanta and get yet another land into play and have 8 lands in play under limited resources, which seems a little bit absurd, right? Anyway, my opponent thought so and scooped butt. So you can see I really like the Wishclaw Talisman. I feel like I want it in here, but I don't know. I mean, that game felt a little bit like an outlier. Anyway, I've got a mulligan here, and I'm facing Daniel P10 running Niv Mizzet Reborn, which is another one of those very scary commanders if they can just get to the point where they can play it, because when it comes into play, they get to draw up to 10 cards. Like, this is exactly why you need to just keep them off their mana, because just coming into play means you probably lose. Like, you can't answer that with the Swords to Plowshares. If your opponent's drawn 10 cards, right, the game's already over. So, all right, so I'm going to try to get to a point where I'm worried about their commander, but I need to pressure them and then try to keep the commander off the board. And the only way I can do that is to go get a sword here, hope that I don't get punished too badly on this turn. And then after that, I've got to start attacking their hands and reduce their options. Opponent plays a Crypt Gas, which very strange, very weak without Urborg, frankly. Meanwhile, I get to run out sword and get it equipped, and my pro black means that the Crypt Gas cannot block, so I can start getting into my opponent's hand here. I've got to, if I can get them empty-handed, then the Remand would put their commander back into their hand and force them to discard it. So that would be nice. Anyway, I'm going to follow that up with the Thran Dynamo into a Talisman and pass. The other thing I can do, hopefully, is get my commander down sooner rather than later. Anyway, my opponent plays land, and of course, I assume they are going for their commander here, because why wouldn't they try to draw 10 cards? They extort me, and I don't care. Okay, I have to remand that and really need a solution here. You can see here's where Winter Orb would be vastly superior to limited resources, of course. All right, so I'm going to Demonic Tutor here. And I'm going for a Mind Shatter. I decide, that's going to make their commander cost 7. I think in hindsight, this was actually a mistake. So the correct thing for me to do was just to get a counterspell and also to play Breya. Pre-combat, play Breya. Post-combat, get a counterspell. Because the problem is with Cryptghast right there, boom. And look what happens. My opponent gets to draw, reveals all this garbage and gets to draw back up to 4 cards. Just like that. Boom, 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 boom. And I've now, and I also got that problem in their commander. So fortunately, I drew the muddle. So I muddle for Snapcaster, basically a regrowth, and hit my opponent, float some mana. Post combat, I'm gonna, after the untap, I'm gonna play Snapcaster targeting Mind Shatter, then empty my attack phase, and then Mind Shatter my opponent once more, taking all the cards out of their hand, and then move my sword over to my Snapcaster so that I don't get hit with the Cryptghast and pass for the turn. Opponent top decks Growth Spiral and plays it into a Mana Vault, extorts me, and attacks. Now this is not too bad for me if I can just get a handle on the situation, but the problem of course now is that my opponent has tons of mana, right? So I'm going to go ahead and kill Cryptghast right away and then smash in. My opponent has tons of mana, and I sack Breya to do it because it'll allow me to take advantage of my Mishra's Workshop by killing Breya right there as opposed to sacrificing a Thopter and pass. Well, yeah, I moved the sword over and I pass. So I moved the sword over so that I have a blocker for the 6/6 flyer that will live. My opponent destroy target creature or land, destroys my Breya, which is not great. And then fortunately, I top deck a Yogg Will, and so I get to run out of will, spend all my mana pre-combat, untap all my lands post-combat. I actually wish for a DT for a Skull Clamp here because I'm going to play Breya pre-combat attack, and then post-combat I'm going to run down that Skull Clamp off of the workshop, and then use Strand Dynamo mana to refill my hand to full, and then throw a Brainstorm in there while I'm at it. Right, so the game is over, but that was pretty gnarly. And this was another. I didn't even think about this when I was talking earlier, but this is yet another example of why you need to control their mana, and you can't just settle for trying to counter stuff. Although this can be countered, but remember that they have continuously printed cards that prevent counter magic from being the be-all end-all. And Cavern of Souls is an example of that. So if your whole game plan is just counter everything, you're going to lose to Cavern of Souls quite often. It's got to be mana control. So anyway, that's it though. Daniel P10 goes down, and I end up playing Token Counter. It looks like twice. Token Counter running Depala, Pilot Examiner. I've got an insane start, and this is a non-serious opponent. However, or commander. However, on my first turn, so I was going first. I actually accidentally my opponent said hello and good luck, and I was typing back, and when I hit enter, it skipped my turn. So for my first turn in this game, although it doesn't look like it because of fast mana, my first turn was don't play a land, say go. And it set me way back because my first turn should have been a Soul Ring, and so everything I'm doing is like 2 turns slower than what it should be. Now at the time, I had Lotus Field in the limited resources version, which is what this is, and as you can see, I'm actually getting beat down because I'm so far behind. I am going to at least Mind Shatter here, my opponent, and so reduce some of the damage, but I'm getting whacked pretty hard here with some and that first turn skip has actually cost me real bad. So Treachery, I go ahead and float some mana in response. I only have 2 lands to untap, but I can run out a Deluge and go ahead and put Sword of Feast and Famine on this guy and hope that this will get me there. It's actually a 5/5. It's just shrunk by Deluge. If I get hit by the Fleetwheel Cruiser there, I'll drop to 1, but I won't have lost. Instead, my opponent, fortunately for me, draws a vehicle, and so I'm able to play Umezawa Shite, smash in, still can't play Breya, and have to pass for the turn. but we're getting close now. I've got an active Jete running. Opponent's empty-handed and has nothing. Decides opts not to sack his Inventor's Fair last turn, which was interesting. Anyway, Ancient Tomb, not super stellar for me right there. I didn't think, yeah, I think we're bugging. I don't think I drew Ancient Tomb. This was a turn where I played Breya and then my opponent conceded, and that's why it's not. But yeah, that was a little bit of a frustrating game just for having skipped my turn, but it worked out all right in the end. Made it quite a bit harder. So anyway, we jump into a second game, and I think this is he said that was his non-serious deck, so he jumps into a second game with Liliana, which I assume is his serious commander, and I have to mulligan, which is no fun against Liliana, but I am at least going first. So I go ahead and first turn preordain. I tuck cards that are not land on the bottom and find a second land, and now I can Merchant Scroll, go get a mana drain, which will hopefully allow me to play Fact or Fiction or Urza, but more importantly, it should keep Liliana off me. Oh, never mind. Now you can see the whole Lotus field limited resources combo looking pretty trash. Versus if limited resources was a Winter Orb right there, I would have slammed Winter Orb, play Lotus Field, and I probably just win the game on the spot, right? So I'm getting picked apart by his discard, and my opponent has a Phyrexian Arena. I'm just getting crushed here, right? But I do get to Vindicate the Arena, and I have almost nothing. Opponent runs out of Dark Confidant, so this is just awful all around. So I go ahead and play a map, sack the map, and get a workshop, use the workshop to play Coalition Relic. And the reason I do this is because Coalition, the workshop will tap for black thanks to my opponent's Urborg, so it actually gives me Breya mana. Opponent then plays their Liliana, doesn't take the limited resources out of my hand just yet. And then finally goes ahead and sacks and gets that last card out of my hand. I probably should have slammed it into play. But oh well, I was trying to sandbag it. All right, so for my turn, I draw Mox Opal. I do get to play the Mox is nice. I actually get to play Breya here. I've got plenty of mana left. I'm going to kill the Dark Confidant immediately, and I still have 2 mana up so that I can, if my opponent tries to kill my creature, I can do something with it. So I'm going to block the one that allows him to sacrifice because I'm planning to get Liliana off the board as soon as possible. My opponent plays a Damnation, and in response, I decide not to sack and target the Lily. I just charge because I need to replay Breya and have an activation ready to go. So that allows me to do this. And fortunately, because I realize that my opponent's going to minus and put his Dark Confidant into play, why wouldn't he? So I'm just working that. My opponent takes the Mox Diamond out of my hand. I go ahead and brainstorm for the turn. Find a Signet, and I stack some really nice high-quality blue cards right on top. So I'm playing empty-handed here, but I do get to smash Liliana, and so my opponent's discard effect, which affects both players, was actually hitting him as well. So it was actually working in my favor to some extent. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and draw for the turn. I decide not to spend my mana or do anything, and I'm just going to pass. I'm just going to sit on a Cryptic Command, and not in a big hurry. Opponent draws a Cabal Coffers, always lovely when you get an Urborg. This one's a weird one. I don't know why he sends in with both. I go ahead and just chump block the Liliana. And my opponent's thinking, oops, decides to sack the Blood Pet to cast Altar Reap, which I'm going to counter, and then bounce the Liliana, which leaves my opponent with just a Liliana in hand. He was going to try to draw 2 cards there. This actually did not go well for my opponent at all. But he gets to play a Liliana with just a ton of mana, thanks to Cabal Coffers, of course. So I'm going to grab that Impulse that we knew was on top and Impulse my way into Shackles, yummy. But I'm 1 land away from taking the Liliana. However, the Shackles will allow me to steal a lot of the activator cards that my opponent's been using. I don't swing in for 4 because I want to play a little defense here. Life total's still a bit sketchy with the Caress and everything going on over there. Excuse me. All right, Weathered Wayfarer, card that very much does like Lotus Field. So I'll go ahead and play that guy here. And if I'm lucky, I'll get to activate it. And then we can steal Liliana, and we can do some other good things like chase that death down for the Cabal Coffers. Unfortunately, excuse me. Doesn't work out because my opponent has removal. So I sack my Mox Opal and my Breya in order to kill Liliana in response before it gets any of the triggered abilities from creature dying. And I lose my Withered Wayfarer. Do not top deck anything special here, but I do have the ability to replay Breya. And I mean, the Skull Clamp is good, but I cannot take out that Liliana right now, and my opponent draws a flip ability. So immediately flips it, replays Grave Crawler, starts a Grave Crawler Rusalka scheme to remove my flyers. I then attempt to steal the Rusalka, of course, and my opponent doesn't allow me to. Swing in for Liliana, beats. I get to kill off the zombie that way, and then, bam, top decking. So my opponent, a lot of work to keep me off the Skull Clamp, and now all kind of undone. Opponent goes for a Duress here, and in response, I go ahead and just sack and kill Liliana. And sacking the Skull Clamp, which I no longer need anymore. Opponent Duresses away I can't remember what they took there. It got exiled. They took my, Demonic Tutor, of course. Hits me for some damage and replays their commander, I think. No, it does not replay their commander. I think they're maybe like one short or something. Anyway, for my turn, I'm going to attempt to treachery their Gravecrawler, and they've got an answer, which really stinks. And it was probably too aggressive of me. I should have just stripped away that Urborg or Coffers, because those are the cards that are threatening me. Or I could have played a blue source. Oh, I didn't have a second island. That's what it was. And I tutored for 3. You can see I had flagstones in here to go with Lotus Field at the time. I thought that would be cute. Totally foolish for the exact reason you're seeing here. It's about sequencing order and what's useful. I go ahead and lose 2 more life to Liliana's Caress because my opponent top decks a discard spell, and I had carefully been marshaling my life total to allow it myself to potentially discard 1 more time. So I was like, please don't kill me with him to Torok, right? But I kill the Cabal Coffers, and you don't see it here because we are apparently bugged. But I played Breya there with exactly 2 mana untap. My opponent uses Liliana's ability. In response, I sack a flyer and the Grim Monolith, and I gain 5 life. And then I lose 2 to Caress. My opponent has to discard the card in their hand that they can't cast. And then Breya and the flyer that's remaining attack and kill Liliana of the Veil, at which point I've got Necro, a bunch of life, and a full hand against a completely empty hand. And my opponent concedes, which is why we probably bugged out at the end there. So able to beat Token Counter's Sirius deck as well, but that was pretty cool. Ace Steve C is the next opponent, and Ace Steve C is playing, well, does it matter? I mean, look at my hand. Odric Lunarch Marshall. I start with a fast start, and before I can even get it up and running, my opponent decides they don't even want to play, so fair enough. King Hill is next, and King Hill is playing a Karametra, God of Harvest. Here you can see that I was trying out Mystic Sanctuary. I think the fact that this is a fetchable land makes it a really, really interesting card. It's a kind of mini, it has the potential to be like a mini, what's a card? A miniature, almost Snapcaster. It's close. There's a, I mean, it puts it on top. It puts the card on top. You can see I'm trying to dig up some mana, and I'm having a tough time finding it. So anyway, it puts the card on top, but if you can, like, you sack a fetch at the end of their turn and go put a land, put a spell that you want on top, an instant or sorcery on top of your library, then that's a very powerful effect. The problem with Mystic Sanctuary that I was running into is that, so I go ahead and copy my map, and I make this play here. I'm setting up for a little bit later. My opponent gets to run out a bunch of mana sources, but they're not really doing a lot else besides playing a bunch of mana sources. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the card that I fetched, which was Soul Ring. And now I can Soul Ring. I was hoping that I would get to work with my Throne of the High City. So I'm trying to get some board presence so that I can go ahead and start drawing 2 cards per turn. You can see how valuable Throne is, even against even against, basically, if their deck tries to play control regardless of the colors, Throne of the High City is extremely useful. So anyway, here I'm going to go ahead and Mystical Tutor for a Demonic Tutor, and I'm going to play a sword and equip sword and, oh well, get a land first, equip sword and attack. And I send them both because I'm off this Throne of the High City plan for a moment. All right, and then I'm going to run out Omizo's Jete and equip the Jete, and I separate them this way so that if my opponent has removal for either creature, there's still something of a punish. I leave them with their Thawing Glaciers, and I leave my Wasteland up. Opponent plays Wrath of God and clears the board, but the last card in my hand, of course, and I drop Brought Back. So the last card in my hand is Demonic Tutor. I've got Brought Back, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this, and I realized that the first thing I want to do is I want to get threats on board so that I can continue to pressure my opponent. And then I will do the Demonic Tutor Brought Back limited resources thing. I'm also missing some white here, so for the like, I don't have double white, but I can Enlighten Tutor it up if I want it, or I can do it this way. So I decide I'll do this, and with the drawing of Enlighten Tutor, I actually get the capacity to Enlighten Tutor for the limited resources plan. So my opponent, on the other hand, is just Oracle of Moldiah, getting even more lands. I'm going to kill that, but geez, man, my opponent's got so much land ramp, right? And so whatever they're building up for, I don't want to deal with it, so I'm going to attempt to handle it very soon. But let's start drawing 2 cards per turn in the meantime. Finally finding a white source means that I can now Brought Back as well, which is huge. And sacking the throne there is not so bad because I'm going to play my 5th land in just a moment. So my opponent's just super land ramping, and I figure I am essentially dead meat here if I don't deal with all those lands somehow. And obviously I cannot Tezzeret into a Winter Orb, so I'm going to go ahead and tutor a limited resources. So land, resources, boom, opponent concedes. Of course I would attack, untap all my lands, cast Wasteland. Like, they would have to sack down to 5 lands, and if any of them were non-basic, then I get to Wasteland one of the non-basics, and then I get to use Brought Back to put the Wasteland back into play. Pretty bad news for my opponent. However, I think, and looking at this, I don't even think I was going to bother. I was having fun with limited resources here because it's just such a pleasure to crush these Battlecruiser ramp decks with this card. But I think ultimately I was just going to ultimate Tezzeret 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, block one of them and take 30. Seems like a good way to go. So I guess a lot of that was what do you call it? Academic at that point. So Stryan here is, I believe, a fan of the channel. So we ended up playing like 3 games, and this is some serious, like, much more challenging Magic if I remember correctly. And my opponent's playing Breya, and it's a fan of the channel, so it's not like crap Breya. This is like hardcore gaming. So we'll see how it goes. But I've got a heck of a start. I even have Force of Will backing it up, and I have the ability to Vampiric for some way to get my hand full again. And so here's the big punish, right? So my opponent just Imperial Sealed their best card, their best draw, right to the top of their library. So what do you think I'm going to do? I need to refill my hand, and my opponent's best card is on top of their library. Well, there's one card here that does both. I do Brainstorm here, which I think was actually a terrible decision. I should have just held the Brainstorm and Vampiric Tutored. But it is what it is, and of course I go get Jace. I was kind of like alluding to that just a minute ago. And boom, tuck away their Mana Crypt, and now my opponent is in deep doo-doo. So I've just counterspelled their Imperial Seal, and after that I start drawing cards. He's got a Talisman of Progress. But so I traded this Cavern of Souls in. I guess I brainstormed because I wanted to hit land drops, but it was super greedy. I should have kept Force of Will because the Jace play was so critical. And I should have kept a blue card in hand for that and just waited on hitting a land drop. But at any rate, I think Yeah. Okay. So it progresses. So I brainstorm and get a wasteland and sit on a force of will. My opponent tries for a trinket mage, which I then counter. We're going to get back to the game here. We seem to be lagging. And of course, if you realize what I'm going to do now, I'm actually jaced away the limited resources because it's too early. And instead, I'm going to go Enlightened Tutor for a Crucible. So can we advance? Yeah. And I wasteland one of my opponent's cards. He does get a Duretti, so he's able to deal with the Crucible. But at this point, I have a Skull Clamp, and I'm prepping to cast Breya. I've got an active Jace. I'm going to get Breya down. I'm going to draw a bunch of cards off of Skull Clamp. I mean, I refill my entire hand. My opponent's sitting on this tiny little bit of board presence. And the game is over, so Stryan just scoops it up wisely, and we move on to the second game. So I don't know why that was so buggy. And another Breya match, and I've got another Mana Crypt draw. He's got a first turn Ponder here. And I get to run out Aggression. So why is it so... Why are we not advancing the plot here? Okay, yeah. So I get a top deck, which is just crazy. It makes my draw even better. I get to run out Talisman into Stoneforge right away. I'm threatening to start whacking my opponent with a sword. And on top of that, I even have Spellseeker if my opponent has removal for that Stoneforge. Instead, he's ramping and Dot seizes the Sword of Feast of Famine out of my hand, which is interesting. So that's definitely a difference between our deck. I'm not playing Thoughtseize, of course. We'll go ahead and brainstorm here and then tithe into more mana and run out of Soul Ring, Expedition Map, Spellseeker, and I'll use Spellseeker to go get a card that will punish my opponent if they make the obvious play, which is land Breya, right? So if they do, they're trading their whole hand in, and that probably keeps them off of doing that, which means that I can then use Expedition Map to make my own Breya play, which my opponent can't respond to particularly well. So we'll go ahead and do this number, and I decide, oh yeah, that's what it was. I decide instead of Expedition Map Breya, I'm just going to go Throne of the High City and start drawing 2 cards per turn. I'm going to leave my creatures back in case my opponent has a Snapcaster. I don't want him to become the Monarch. A couple of points of damage don't matter too much. Instead, he's got Crucible, and he can sit on a counter spell that's pretty gnarly. So the Crucible is going to keep up with the, as far as drawing 2 cards per turn, it's going to keep up with the Monarch in count. However, it's not going to necessarily, are we going to bug? Man, how come it always bugs on the best games? But the problem was I drew a counter here or something. I think I drew some kind of counter. I didn't draw whatever this is. And I was able to play a land and then play that Vandal Blast fully powered off of this and destroy both of these lands. My opponent tries to counter back and I counter and then he just concedes at that point. I'm the Monarch and I just 2 for Wondom and he's down to only 3 cards in hand and I'm down to, at that point, 5 because I dropped to 4 and then +1. So, and then a Mind Shatter is staring at my opponent if they tries to do anything. So we move on to the third game against Stryan. Both of these, all these I think were pretty interesting. Another Breya on Breya match. I've got a start that's a little risky here. Well, it's very risky actually. I'm just going to go first turn Mox Diamond, pass, and my opponent runs out Soul Ring. So I'm going to tithe, and it hits. So I do get 2 lands here, but I'm not ahead on land. And then on my turn, I just play Hallowed Fountain and pass. I don't understand why I would do this. I would play Tundra here and pass. This looks like it might bug. Okay, but I guess I did that. I don't know. Because the idea is I want brought back up in case my opponent had removal. Is this gonna bug again? Why is it bug on the good games? Yeah, we're gonna bug out. Well, that's super disappointing here. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. We just have to move on. I don't know how I won that game. I don't know because the replays are such garbage. All right, move on. I've got this game against Daniel X52, and sorry, Stryan, if you're watching, man. I tried to get some games. I tried to get our games, and most of them bugged out. So anyway, my opponent here is playing Gishath's Son's Avatar, which is just it's a wish and a prayer, an 8-mana threat. I've got a weak draw, but I have a Force of Negation to deal with the Soul Ring early. My opponent inexplicably plays a Karoo into a Wasteland in play. Yeah, I'm going to waste your land. I don't understand that one at all. I decide I'm going to get a Mox Diamond because I'm trying to build up for a Necro, and if I draw any land here, I can just go land Mox. I don't, so I just do it this way and Fact or Fiction instead. But I did get a second blue card that I can use to Force a Negation with. So this doesn't take me off of Force a Negation. It does allow me to hit my land drop. And of course I find multiple, and I'm going to force that Soul Ring. I find multiple sources of black here. And with the last card in my hand, I'll draw 7 new cards, a brand new hand of cards, which is why I could afford to just go in on 2 for all those plays where I was falling behind on card advantage to get tempo completely undone by this massive card advantage engine of Necropotence. And of course, right here, you don't see it, but actually Mind Shattered my opponent for 5 and then they conceded. But for some reason, the replay often misses the last turn or two on the turns where your opponent concedes. Like it's like it stops recording like right the second when they concede and it hasn't finished recording everything yet. Like they need to extend that out, but I don't know. I'm not their programmer. I wish I were, honestly, because there's so many things I wish I could fix in this interface. Anyway, I've got a game against Command Command D, and I've got an okay start. It's actually pretty bad, honestly. But I looked at their commander and figured, well, I got a little bit of ability to dig here, and the commander doesn't seem like a huge threat. So there's that Mystic Sanctuary that I decided I shouldn't be running. The thing about Mystic Sanctuary that I don't like, I don't mind the fact that it comes into play tapped and everything, but what I hate is that it won't put, like it didn't put the Preordain back on top of my deck. I have to have 3 islands in order, it has to be my 4th land basically for it to be any good, and that's just too much. If it would work on itself, like if having 3 islands and it's an island so it would count itself would work out, then I think the card might be okay, but for tempo purposes, I just go ahead and play limited resources here. Pass. Probably not the greatest, but yeah, I get to Vandal Blast my opponent here and pass. Opponent plays their 5th land, and that's it. No more lands. I go ahead and force a negation this, keeping my force of will, and then Yogg will back some extra card draw. I had Mental Misstep instead of Flame Slash at this time. However, I do think that the Flame Slash is probably better, just because removal is really good. Opponent cheats a Timio's Journal into play. I go ahead and see what Dark Confidant reveals. I don't find anything great, so I go ahead and Dack Faden, steal their journal, and they've had enough. At this point, they can't play any more lands, so they never get... I've killed all of their artifact mana, so they can't get... They don't have 6 mana. They can't play any more lands, so they can't actually ever even play their commander, which is the whole point of limited resources, is so that you don't get abused by a commander. And of course, it affects me as well. So it's not like it's a. I mean, it's a fair card, right? It's a card that you have to build around and play around, right? It's a build around me card. So anyway, heck of a start here against Javid Nazrin playing Keranos, God of Storms, and it's so good my opponent concedes without even seeing me play it. So I start another game against Kataran Master here. Playing Sashiro the Anointed, so non-serious, obviously. Got a heck of a good start here with a lot of potential upside. So, and that throne works out real nicely for me as well. Depending on how the next couple turns goes, it's quite feasible that despite my opponent playing green, I can run that throne out. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then I'm going to go ahead and copy the Soul Ring. Pass. Looks real safe to play Throne, so I'm going to go ahead and play it, use it, play my Dark Confidant, start drawing 2 cards per turn. Opponent ambush Vipers me, but I didn't swing because they would have been able to ambush Viper and kill my Urza, but I don't swing because why the heck would I? I'm the control player. I don't need to pip my opponent for a point of damage. Turns out to work in my favor when I'm able to block, and get my commander down and take out their commander. Tapping my flyers for the mana that I need to pay for that effect. Then I go ahead and take out their other creature as well. Draw an extra card for the turn, and sit back with my Urza ready to block. Alright, so I'll get my commander down in a moment, but notice that my opponent's got his Cradle here, and I am also attacking their mana base. Opponent tries to crop rotate the card that I Vindicate, which that means that they're going to get a land here. That's no good, so instead I just tutor up that Mental Misstep. Play it, and I have 1 floating, so I really didn't need Mental Misstep. It could have been any of my other counters that would have done the job. So the one time it was good, it really wasn't all that good. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and run out a Tezzeret and sack for Expedition Map, which will then get a Wasteland, and I'm going to attack their mana again. Got to keep them off their commander. And want to stall while I'm drawing 3 cards per turn. That seems pretty good. I go ahead and fetch Crucible, attack their mana again. Play Brought Back, and I get Tezzeret as well as my Wasteland, and then I plus Tezzeret, or I minus Tezzeret, right? Sword of Feast and Famine, equip my Dark Confidant, send in with the team, and then finally my opponent scoops. I'm about to untap all of my lands, slam a Necro, and draw new cards. Basically, I would just draw 7 because I don't need any of these cards, any of these lands when I've got Crucible, Wasteland running, and whatnot. So I really just want a brand new hand. So I untap everything, tap for 3 black, slam a Necro, draw 7. And I'm pretty sure, or 6 rather, draw 6, since I get a Monarch card each turn. And I'm pretty sure from there I could manage to win the game. Yeah, so I love that, like Wasteland, Tezzeret for the Crucible, Tezzeret for the Crucible, killing Tezzeret, fetching a Wasteland, replaying a Wasteland, which I sack, killing the Wasteland, brought back, which gives me Tezzeret and a Wasteland, and then, of course, Sword of Feast and Famine is like totally just devastating. Brought back is way better than what, I don't think people realize how good it is, but I'm tired of belaboring the point. Anyway, Calvops, 3/1/1, playing Rankle, Master of Pranks, and I have a acceptable hand with first turn Imperial Seal off for Urborg. I never want to play Urborg against a opponent who is mono black. However, as you can see, I have made the transition to Urborg, so my mana base is more correct, set up more correctly here. Opponent gets a Crucible Worlds, but doesn't have any lands to recur just yet. Of course, if I Mind Twist my opponent, then I'll probably be putting cards in their graveyard that will be lands, and then I'm just putting them right where the Crucible can replay it. So instead I decided to play Breya, and it's a good thing I do. My opponent plays a Liliana the Veil, and I'm going to go ahead and attack and kill that thing. First things first, let's go ahead and play Urza, and then we'll go ahead and smash that Liliana with just Breya, because it's unlikely. If I send just a Thopter, I can think of a lot of cards my opponent could use to kill a Thopter with just 1 mana. If I send both, well, then I'm tapping a potential mana source, since my creatures act as mana. Opponent goes for a Sinkhole, it doesn't matter. I still have Cryptic Command mana up. And then finally, they go for Hero's Downfall, and then this does matter to me. I want to counter that, and I want to bounce the Crucible, because that's what I was waiting for, so that I could get the Mind Shatter off. Because now I can Mind Shatter that out of my opponent's hand. They won't be able to, if I hit lands, they won't be able to replay those lands. And then the Crucible will go away, and from there, I actually have enough mana to Mind Shatter. So if you look at it, Crypt, and 3 will dump my opponent's hand, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4 mana available, which means I can then play Narset, but also I could do something along the lines where in the middle of this I Trinket Mage for, it's like Trinket Mage, Soul Ring, tap for 4, Mind Twist my opponent, 1, 2, 3, Narset, put more cards in my hand. So opponent scoops there, but I suppose I suppose I would have too, although he didn't. I don't think that might be yet another case where I actually did get the Mind Twist off, and it just never revealed itself because of that concession. Anyway, so Rainbow Unicorn was the last opponent I faced that day, if I remember correctly. Either way, though, we're running through all of them. So playing the Gitrog monster, and I have a heck of a start. And I remember Rainbow Unicorn being an opponent who has more serious, like, competitive decks. So this very nice to get going right away this way. I think I decide, yeah, Coalition Relic, and I decide to Imperial Seal here. I remember I was thinking about it either way. So we'll see what we got in a second. Opponent fetches for an Arbor and then uses the Arbor to putrefy my. That's really like kind of all in on my hold on, pause, on my Mana Crypt there, making that play. But what I did was I tutored for deck Faden because I have Narset, and so Narset then digs me up some extra mana sources, Mox Opal that I played last turn, and a Talisman which turns it on this turn, and I start smashing into my opponent's hand. And if they want to try to accelerate using artifact mana, of course Dak Vaden's got that covered. So this is a really tough spot, and my opponent can't dig their way out by drawing extra cards. So they've got to get mana sources. So they get a Ramanap down. I go ahead and take more cards out of the hand, leaving my opponent with just nothing. Play an Urza into map into a Weathered Wayfarer pass. So they will get to Ramanap something, and he top decks a Tireless Tracker. And it replays an Ancient Tomb. So I go ahead and waste the tomb. My opponent then... so I waste the tomb. My opponent does not sack the clue, because if they do, then I just plus stack Faden, and then they have to discard... They can't draw any more, and they have to discard the card. So he wisely doesn't sack the clue, but the problem is I just clear my attack step, and I steal the clue this way. And it acts as a mana source for me, as well as card draw down the road when I want it. I go ahead and use Breya, clear their board. And my opponent, despite their top deck Ramanap into Tireless Tracker, Ancient Tomb turn, has precisely the same nothing that they had a few moments ago. And I'm up I actually sacked the clue as removal instead of for card draw. And I even get to Weathered Wayfarer, and what's crazy about this is if you notice I have exactly one land in play. Like everything that's happening here is off of a single Hallowed Fountain. Of course, I'm going to go get Throne here and start drawing extra cards per turn since my Narset's all used up. But yeah, isn't that crazy? Off of one land, because it felt like I was so far ahead. It felt like I had many more lands than my opponent, but I was looking at the Weathered Wayfarer, realizing how it actually had played out. So anyway, I was on the 11th, and then I've got those games waiting in the wings for the end of this video. But on the 12th and 13th, I played a few today as well. We're going to run through the rest of the game. So I've only been playing off and on, mainly because it takes a long time to find games, and also because I've been mixing it up between the different formats and such. Anyway, so this version's a little bit closer. And here he is again, Torban, Thrain of the Red Fell. I've seen this guy a lot lately, like 6, 7, 8 times. I don't know how many times I've seen this. I've never lost to it. It's a terrible commander that doesn't produce cards. It doesn't produce mana. It doesn't remove anything from the board. It's just a terrible commander that helps you win when you're already winning and doesn't do jack for you when you're losing. So anyway, unfortunately my opponent does have a Chain Whirler though, and I'm struggling. My mana's a little tight here to get anything going. So I get a Trinket Mage has a Hell Rider. His opponent's like beating me down furiously. Now watch how useless this commander ends up being, right? Because that's the important thing here. All right, so I'm going to tutor and go get Tithe. I really, really need some mana. All right, so we'll get those, play a land, and I'm trying to decide if I should Treachery or not. And I decide not. All right, so my opponent, Ghost Quarters GQs my land. I have no basics to fetch. Swings in. I'm going to go ahead and chump block. And then decides, now take a look, opponent has the opportunity to play their commander, but plays something else because their commander is just so bad. Pluses up a Chandra, Torch of Defiance, pings me, and I'm going to punish my opponent pretty good here with a brought back, getting my land back, getting my Trinket Mage back into a Soul Ring. And now my turn. Thank you, brought back, for winning this game. I'm now going to Treachery, steal their Hellrider, untap all of my lands, floating a bunch of mana, of course. Stoneforge, untapping a bunch of lands. Play Breya, fetching an Umazoa's Jitte earlier. Hit that Chandra and kill the Chandra, and look at that in a single turn. Completely flip the game. Opponent plays something that isn't their commander, uses abilities that still aren't their commander. What I'm trying to point out here is if that commander was decent at all, then when my opponent has the opportunity to play it, they might actually play it. But if you look at it, there's never a time when playing that card is actually good. So right here, on the final turn, my opponent plays their commander, realizes it does absolute nothing for them, and concedes. And that's all I've ever seen with this commander. It's so bad. You play it and concede because it did nothing to help you get out from... It doesn't make mana, it doesn't make cards, it doesn't kill your opponent's stuff. And anything that doesn't fit one of those three molds is not a good commander. Just period. So play commander, quit. Now imagine if this was a card like Breya or anything, a card that drew cards or did something useful. At least it might come down and swing the game somehow. It's got to be a commander that interacts with artifacts or creatures or draws you extra cards or does something to like maybe get you in the game. But anyway, I won't harp on it too much, but that's just something that continuously seems to come up. People really evaluate their commanders terribly. And then I have this game against Token Counter here, which I think we played much earlier. I don't remember. Anyway, this game against Token Counter, and I just really flub it hard, and I was super disappointed in myself, honestly. Like, I felt so bad the way that I played this game. Playing against Kess, so I'm all excited. He leads off with the Thoughtseize on Sword, which I think is absolutely incorrect. Should I just take in the Cryptic or the Tezzeret or the Treachery, right? Anyway, now I've got Mana Leak, and I've got a way to... I let my opponent Latnom's Legacy there because I'm concerned with more disruption or Kess. And opponent goes for a Duress. I'm going to go ahead and this is the mistake right here. So I fetch up a non-black source, and I don't have black mana here. So then I can't play my commander, top deck an Imperial Seal. I can't play anything now. A land Imperial Seal there would have been game over, right? Because I would have gone and got Mana Crypt. Instead, I still can't play my commander, so I try a Desperation Bounce play. Opponent, of course, hits their land drop, plays Kess, starts attacking my hand, takes out the Treachery. I still can't play my commander. I'm in desperation mode. My opponent's going to play a Blightning, which is just devastating. Land, Blightning. Basically, this game's over. I still can't play my commander, but maybe I can... I mean, my opponent's kind of low on cards, so like maybe if I could just get my commander down, then I would have a chance. But, so I go ahead and just, try to protect Urza, because Urza's providing me some mana here. I want to get some extra cards in my hand but just look what's happening. Price of Progress, Flashback, Price of Progress, dead. Like, all of this because I didn't fetch the correct land, right? If I had just fetched a black land so I could play my commander, so I could get Kess off the board, none of this happens. So it's one of those games where it was super painful for me to play. It's hard for me to rewatch, but it is one of those things where you've got to realize, like, or at least I need to realize, like, as much as I want to, grouse and complain about the outcome of this game, it was completely and entirely preventable and totally my own fault. I lost this game when I chose to fetch, for triple blue instead of fetching for the card that controls the board, which would have been Breya. And and also, by not getting black, I had no way to play any black cards that I might draw there. So just horrible decision, and yeah, kind of left me salty at myself. Basically, it took me about 10 minutes before I was ready to play again. But shook it off and got into some games here, and I've got these games against R. Foister. So R. Foister here playing Teferi, so this is a nice hardcore opponent, and I've got a very decent start. I've got Force of Will to keep a Soul Ring off the board, and I've got the ability to go get my own. So hopefully, if the Arcane Signet sticks, it does. Looking real good now. Certainly would not mind an extra blue card. My opponent actually taps out to bounce here. I think this is just garbage. The tapping out right here just gives me all the information I need. I don't understand it at all. All right, so I'm going to go get Soul Ring. Soul Ring rundown into Mana Source, into Mana Source. Sure, you can do your worst here because your worst is not going to be anywhere as nasty as my playback. And if you don't do anything, I've got Force of Will plus Throne of the High City. So I actually don't need to run out. I don't need to do anything. I can just sack Throne of the High City and draw. And I'll just start drawing. And now we're just going to play the I win Throne of the High City game, which is exactly what I was saying in the beginning of the video. Throne of the High City is in here because this is how you beat blue. You get more mana and you play lands that they can't deal with. And Throne is the absolute epitome of such a land. So I'm going to go ahead and play a Fact or Fiction end step. It actually sticks, which is wild. So I go ahead and just take, they give me the 4 pile. I take the 4 pile, run down a bunch of mana sources, and pass for the turn. I'm going to have to discard, but that's okay. Oh, I think I end up playing the sword. Yeah, that's right. So I don't have to discard here. So I can still play Remand and Force of Will. But my opponent does bounce the sword, which is fine. I'm not going to fight over it. So I do end up discarding. So that's what I was thinking of earlier. The discard comment. I'm going to go ahead and sack end step and fetch, or impulse rather. And then because I impulse a Narset, I'm actually going to fetch Cephalid Colosseum instead of fetching a, hold on, I'm fetching Cephalid Colosseum instead of fetching a Cavern of Souls. And then I clear my attack step because my opponent doesn't need to know that I'm not holding Mana Drain. And attempt to play a Narset here. And my opponent actually has a Mana Confluence. So I just play a Remand on my Narset. He has a Spell Snare. So I Force the Will the original target, which was my Narset. I Force the Will. Basically, I play a card, my opponent plays a counter, I counter the count. I try to remand my own Narset back to my hand and leave our counter on the stack, which, because Confluence had a target and then 2 draws, the target will fizzle and then the card will not allow him to draw extra cards. So then my opponent attempts to counter my Remand, which would allow his Confluence to counter my Narset and draw him 2 cards. But instead, I Force of Will targeting his Confluence, I allow him to counter my Remand, and then so his Confluence goes away. He counters my Remand, but the Narset sticks, and then I Colosseum. I let my opponent during my opponent's upkeep. I Colosseum them. They skip their draw step. He does get to play his commander. I actually screwed up here, by the way. I failed to draw an extra card off a Narset, but I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I actually take Ponder because it has too much mana, and I don't think that I can mana leak my opponent. And I find a Crucible of Worlds off the Ponder. So go ahead and Spell Blast the Crypt, pass for the turn, take an extra card, of course, and then during the upkeep, make them draw 3 and discard 3, and then they don't get to draw for their turn because they miss their draw step. My opponent does plus Teferi in order to get 1 card in their hand for the turn. Now, really pressuring my opponent's situation. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to Merchant Scroll, which sticks, so I'm going to go get the lock Forbid. I'm going to go ahead and Demonic Tutor as well and get a Vindicate so I can get the Teferi off the board. But I've got a Forbid lock here where I'm drawing 2 cards per turn. My opponent gets only 1 card per turn forever. And as soon as I get rid of the Teferi, they'll get 0 cards per turn. So go ahead and Mana Leak that guy. Opponent doesn't get to draw for the turn, does get to Teferi, and Teferi's into a Grim Monolith, so they get a play, but now they're tapped out. And so I can just run out Lotus, Vindicate that, and that's a good game. Opponent gives up. So they're just not going to get to they could draw a card and I could let them have it, and then they could go to their next upkeep and I can Coliseum them then, and the card in their hand will hit the bin, and then they won't get a draw step. They'll never get a draw step again. And of course, with Forbid running and 2 cards per turn, they get no draw step, and this is a hard lock, right? Like there's nothing. They can't even draw Cavern of Souls because they don't get a draw step anymore. They're permanently locked out of ever drawing a new card. So literally, the only thing they can do is because let's say the opponent has, the way this works is, let's say the opponent has 0 cards in hand, right? So I Coliseum them during their upkeep, so they would draw 1 and discard 3, at which point they had 0 cards in hand, so they draw 1 and throw it in the graveyard. And they cannot play the card in the middle of resolving the Coliseum effect. It has to finish resolving. So unless the card has Madness, there's no way for them to play it. So they would draw 1 and discard 3, right? Which would leave them, they would start with 0 cards and they would finish the Coliseum effect with 0 cards. And then they go to their draw step, but they've already drawn for the turn, and this prevents them from drawing a second time. And so they would not get a draw step at all. And so for the rest of the game, I just keep hitting them with Coliseum, and what's going to happen is they cannot draw a card, period. The only thing they could ever play would be a Madness card. If that first card were a Madness card, they could do that. But other than that, they can't draw at all. There's no opportunity. It's not like they can play instants. And so this, at one time I had card that would prevent my opponent from playing instants because I wanted them to not be able to play instants and get out of this lock. But when I realized that you don't have to let them draw for the turn and then hit them with Coliseum, because then they can play that card they drew for the turn. You Coliseum them before they draw for the turn, and then they don't draw for the turn. Once I realized that you do it in that order, and that means that there's not even a way to play instants to get out of this. It is a hard lock. And so with Forbid to counter to ferry their commander on the way down, it's a hard lock. I mean, that's game over. All right, so our Foister wants to play a second game apparently, and wasn't super happy with the outcome of that, I guess. And I have the blue killing Weathered Wayfarer, and so I decided I'm going to keep it, even though this is an incredibly risky keep, because obviously my opponent has already demonstrated they have multiple bounce effects. So I'm really worried that they bounce my Mox Diamond here and then I don't draw a land. But if they don't, I probably just win here, and they don't. And I even top deck a land. So I'm done. I get mana drain up. I'm good. Opponent impulses. I'm not going to fight. Only thing I'm going to fight over is if they try to disrupt me or they try to do something that's going to win. They don't. So boom, let's go tutoring. I'm going to go get a command tower. I want extra blue. And now it also gives me extra white, and so it sets me up real nicely here. I'm going to just keep Weathered Wayfaring. So they attempt to bounce. I'm not going to fight over that. But what I am going to do is Weathered Wayfarer for a Cavern of Souls. So Wayfarer protects himself. I'm going to pitch a copy artifact. I don't see a Soul Ring on either side, and I don't plan to copy the diamond. So even though my opponent bounced the Wayfarer, and clearly their intention was to counter it on the way down, the Wayfarer tutors for prevention for that game plan. I'm all done. Oh, I guess I run this out after combat because might as well. It's too hard. My opponent's down to only 4 cards in hand at this point, by the way. Whereas I'm discarding the hand size at one point because too many cards in hand. All right, so I'm going to go get a fetch land here. This way I can play a 4th land against my opponent's 4 lands, but I can still tutor next turn. I attempt to run out a Skullclap to counter. I don't care. I'm already drawing extra cards. I don't need extra cards. I really just want to get counter spells out of their hand. And so this way I can do the Tithe trick. So sack, holding control, respond to my own ability. Wayfaring, this is my last Wayfarer, and with the final Wayfarer, I'm going to go ahead and get Throne, which is going to win me the game. I now have so much mana that I'm going to wait for one more turn, but at the end of this turn, I'm going to go ahead and activate Throne, and then from then on, and the funny thing is by doing it this way also, not only am I going to draw 2 cards per turn, but I'm actually going to a 5th land, which I'm going to sacrifice at the end of my opponent's turn, dropping to 4. And if my opponent plays land for the turn, then that means Withered Wayfarer is also active, and I can just draw another card. Remember, this entire game was won off the strength of Weathered Wayfarer. That's how good that card is. against blue. And all right. So next is Seraphim 797, and a big part of that is Throne of Thy City, and that is why I put Throne back into both decks, because you need it against mono blue. It's too important. All right. So this opponent's playing Niv Mizzet Perrin, and I've got a very risky keep. I just need one more land, and I don't find it. And I really want one more land. My opponent's dirtling around with some slow start over there, and I don't find it. So I'm going to have to throw a card away. I throw away Jitte, because it'd take forever to Jitte down a 5/5. Finally, I draw a land, so I pitch it to Mox Diamond, cast a Grim Monolith, use that to play Crucible, and replay the land that I just discarded, which happened to be a fetch land too, which means I am ready to rock and roll. Crucible being another card that is extremely strong against blue, because in the blue on blue matches, it is all about mana. All right, I'm going to trinket, and I'm going to go get a crypt here, and I use the crypt to fabricate, and fabricate allows me to go get a soul ring. So this way, although I missed a land drop twice. Like I missed a land drop, then I missed a land drop and discarded the hand size. My opponent sets up a nasty little combo there, which I top deck the answer for. But despite having done all that, I am way, way ahead of my opponent in mana, and I'm going to take their gutter snipe too. Or at least I'm going to try. They brainstorm, ping me, and interestingly enough, decide to ping me and not kill Tezzeret, just so they can draw a card off curiosity. Anyway, run out their commander. I don't fully understand this. I've got 4 lands into play. I just untap, let them have it back, and yeah, replay a land from the graveyard, steal their commander. Opponent realizes what a really, really bad decision they made. And at this point, remember, my first turn was land, my second turn was draw, don't play a land and say done. My third turn was draw, discard, and here we are on turn, a couple of turns later. What is this, turn 5? 6? Anyway, a couple of turns later, and I've got a board that's so long that we have to zoom out, and my opponent is hosed here. I'm about to steal this creature. I'm about to vindicate away this creature and draw a card, and I can even consider, that's one option, but I also have the option to play my commander. There's somebody, how do you want to win, right? Play my commander, Tezzeret for a Skull Clamp and draw like 4 cards immediately. So what do we want to do here? Doesn't matter. The point is my opponent gives up. I just thought that was amazing because of how terrible my start was. All right. And anyway, this opponent, Rendart, is playing Oloro. So we're getting all these like serious games now. It's so nice. I lead off with Cavern of Souls because if my opponent does have a Wasteland, I would prefer Cavern of Souls gets wasted and not my Tundra. Instead, my opponent just fetches, and I'm going to go ahead and turn 2, and I'm going to run out Search for Iskanta, not Arcane Signet. So the reason I ran out Search for Iskanta is it just gives me so much superior card selection that I figure having that in play and then being able to go, I was hoping to find a land so that I could do exactly the play I just made, which was land, Arcane Signet, sit on a mana drain. I see a counterspell, so I'm not going to flip that. So Search has not done anything for me yet other than verify that the cards on top of my library are cards I want. I decide I'm going to keep a Disenchant 2. But I'm not feeling super threatened here. So at the end of my... and then I decide I'm going to run out Spellseeker, which can't be countered, and use it to go get a Tithe. And I do that because I'm going to Tithe at the end of my opponent's turn, and it sticks, and then I get to mill off a City of Brass. I do that because I want to hit my land drops, and I need to get up as much blue as I can. I'm not super worried about disenchanting Bloodchief Ascension. So far, if you've noticed, it's gotten exactly 0 counters. I don't know what it's doing in the Oloro deck. Finally, though, I decide I'm going to go ahead and attempt to disenchant it, and I draw a counterspell out with that, and I'm happy to see that go. I mill off a Tezzeret. I actually don't need Tezzeret this game. I don't think. There's no Winter Orb to go get. Destroy one of my opponent's lands and attack for appointed damage and pass. I'm trying to, so the reason I had focused on Tithe is that I have that limited resources in my hand and I'm trying to set this up. And I screw up here before I should have played limited resources into my 6th land and lock my opponent down. But instead I play my land, I get so excited I play my land before playing the limited resources. It's just a habit to play lands first. And by not being mindful of what I'm doing, I end up I end up deciding to wait on the limited resources because now I can't lock my opponent down to 4 lands, right? Like I can lock him down to 5, but I have to kill one of my own to do it. Just a misplay there. Anyway, I'm going to mana drain their Aetherflux Reservoir and search for Escanta. I don't want to flip search yet because of limited resources. Again, I want to get... So I go ahead and mill off a Crucible because Crucible is going to be useless with the limited resources out. Play a Jitte off the mana that I stole. Run an uncounterable Breya out, and then I am going to drop the limited resources. It'll leave me with a counterspell up. I want to search for Escanta. I want to flip it. So I'll go ahead and play the limited resources. Opponent plows my Breya. I don't care, actually. All right, and so I'm going to keep I think I'm keeping the Cavern. Yeah. So I sack my lands this way, keeping the Cavern because Cavern's pretty good. And I am then going to ready up and pass. Opponent tries a Sower. I don't understand the logic behind tapping 4 mana so that I can remove 2 counters from a Jitte. You might as well just tap out. I don't get that one at all, so I'm good with it. All right, now we can flip Search for Escanta, and I get this. I actually have 6 lands in play, despite the fact that I'm supposed to only have 5. Now I can start using Search for Escanta. So opponent's taking a bit of a beating here, but they're still at 41 thanks to the power of Allura, right? I now have brought back, so I can actually brought back extra lands into play if I can find a way to kill him. But instead, okay, hold on, pause. What I decide to do is I actually have 6 counters on Duretti, so I -6 Duretti and I make triple Aetherflux Reservoir, and then I sack. Did I -6? Oh yeah, I Umezawa's Jitte and remove a counter targeting Spellseeker, and then I brought back targeting Duretti and Spellseeker, so that I'm going to get a fresh Duretti and a Spellseeker, who's going to go get a spell, and this is going to trigger all 3 of my Aetherflux reservoirs, and so I'm going to actually generate a ton of life and go get a proactive spell, and so what's going to happen is I'm going to get over, 40? I'm going to get over 40 life this turn easily, and I'm going to Aetherflux Reservoir and nuke my opponent to death. Was it 40 or 50? Yeah, 50 life. It's no problem here. So I'm going to go get 50 life, and I'm going to nuke my opponent. Don't forget, Umezawa's Jitte is 6 extra life, so that 3, so this is 1, 2, 3, plus 6 is 9, so that puts me at 42. And then when I play a card, it's going to be 2, 4, 6, so that'll put me at 48. So the card that I go get was going to be like Brainstorm or something. And then so I just play Brainstorm and remand it, and then that's it. And I still have enough mana to counterspell my opponent. So kind of awesome. I don't know. It was fun. I liked playing against the Soloro deck, but mostly I just liked, I love using the cards that I know are extremely good that it seems I'm having difficulty convincing others of, but it is what it is. All right. AI Ake 122. One of the last games, of the day is playing Hypetra. I think there's one more game for that day. Anyway, I've got another extremely good start. Are we going to bug out already? Because this doesn't seem right. Why would I do this? Oh, I see what I did. No, I did this specifically because I'm going to Enlighten Tutor. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to Enlighten Tutor, and then I'm going to get Soul Ring down, Soul Ring into Signet, and Mox Opal, and then I'll Brainstorm and play my... and I misclicked, and I put... So I was trying to Brainstorm into... and put the creature into play, not the tithe, and I misclick, and I put the tithe. I play the tithe and not the creatures, so I actually just shuffled away a Weathered Wayfarer, which was crazy, but so be it. Anyway, I play Tezzeret and steal a creature, and at this point, I'm actually got 20 points of damage already in play. Opponent Field of Ruins me, or whatever it is. Yeah, Field of Ruin. I was going to say Field of Dreams. Anyway, I get to play Breya here, untap, so that I have a Forbid up. And this is going to be one of those really fast Breya games. Opponent tries to play a Condamnus Reach. Don't care. Plays a land. And I'm just sitting on a forbid. And yeah, ultimate Tezzeret and attack for lethal. That was a very fast game. And I think before I can finish declaring my attacks, my opponent's scoop. So it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and I leave these two back so that I can forbid. And that's it. All right. So, yeah, so that was the last game of the day. And then I've got these 5 games for today. So this is Atros, Torres, 01. I realize this video is super long, but the point isn't to kill you with the video. It's to provide content that you can watch, and you can watch it as long as you want. You can come back to it. So hopefully, you are enjoying yourself. And with that in mind, I'm actually going to tack a little bit on to the end. So anyway, my opponent is playing Saskia the Unyielding, which basically causes all of your creatures to deal double damage to your opponent. But of course, that is based on a fundamental assumption, which is that you are going to deal damage to your opponent with your creatures, and that is not exactly part of my game plan, so we'll see how this goes. Anyway, I'm running out Breya here, obviously, with Grim Monolith untapped, ton of mana, and a Yogg's Will. It looks like, I really want him to just play like an artifact here so I can get a really nice value will, preordain, play a land, disenchant, whatever artifact they play. Doesn't happen, so all right. Oh, excuse me. So instead, I don't want to rush the will if I don't have to, so I think if I remember right, I guess we're bugged out. I don't know what. I remember like using whatever it was that I had. I think it was it was a Dak Faden, so we're going to bug out. So I didn't draw Model of the Mixture. I drew Dak Faden. So I played Dak Faden and I drew 2 and threw away cards, and I started like churning. I started pumping up my graveyards for a big will down the road. My opponent like kills some of my stuff, and I just keep pumping up, and then I end up playing a gigantic will, and maybe that's why we bugged. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, Rosenbauer is the next opponent here. Or maybe it's because when I played the will, I think my opponent just conceded. They looked at my graveyard and conceded. Playing Psymaster Thopterist. And there's certainly a creature that I have to mulligan. My opponent plays Sleight of Hand, and Sleight of Hand is not a good card. It's an okay card. It's a mediocre card. And here's the problem with it. When you're trying to fix your mana and you play Sleight of Hand and you don't see a land, you do this. You concede, right? Like, so Sleight of Hand is 1 blue, possibly concede the game. That's not a good card. So what you want is a card that's going to let you see the maximum number of new cards to prevent you from mulliganing. So Serum Visions is a card like that because you draw a card. If it's not a land, you then look at the next 2 cards. Maybe they're not lands. You put them to the bottom. And then on the next turn, you draw another card, which is 4 cards deep. And so if there was a land anywhere in those 4 cards, you'll hit your second land. Ponder lets you look at the top 3 cards, and if there's a land there, you got it. And if there's not, you shuffle and draw a card, which is a 4th card. And on the next turn, you draw for your turn. That's a 5th card, so 5 cards deep. Brainstorm lets you go 3 deep, right? And of course, if there's no land in there, then you're kind of hosed. But it's 3 deep versus Sleight of Hand, which is only 2. And Preordain, you get to look at the top 2 cards. If they're not lands, you tuck them. Draw a card for the turn, which should be your 3rd. And then if that's not a land, well, you get 1 more draw step, and there's 4 cards deep to find a land. So cards like that are great. There's also Portent, which is a delayed ponder effect. And there are others, like you could even Opt is better than Sleight of Hand. But anyway, so that's an unfortunate game, but just that's the reasoning behind why that card sucks and why you want your early blue fixing to dig as deep as possible. That's the criteria that when it comes to those types of effects, like Ponder, Preordain and stuff, the criteria you should be using is how far down do I get to go in my library? Because these cards are supposed to fix mulligan situations. 1 land keeps should be fixed by your blue fixing like that. Otherwise, just run more lands, basically. But anyway, Gareth Stone, 1983, is the next opponent. And we'll see how this goes. This opponent is playing Felden of the Third Path, and I remember this opponent making some questionable decisions, if I remember correctly. All right, I'm not going to make the mistake from the last game. I'm going to go get some black. Obviously, I need to get black for a Dark Confidant anyway, but anyway, my opponent runs out a card that doesn't do anything without their commander, which is never a good sign for them. Tries to discard a card in order to draw two. I'm certainly going to counter that. With buyback, I throw away City of Brass, which I can replay with Crucible, and Teachings, which I can flash back later. My opponent makes a comment, as I recall, along the lines of, well, I just wanted to get my card in the graveyard anyway. Then tries to run their commander to my forbid, so I just forbid and buy it back. And then my opponent slow rolls me for almost full 10 minutes and then shows up to continue the game. But despite having started a second game and still playing, so now I'm playing two games at once, so my attention is divided. But opponent tries to block a Jitade creature. That's impossible. I'm just sitting on forbid here because so far it doesn't look like my opponent's doing anything that matters whatsoever. So I'm just going to build up my mana sources a little bit. I find limited resources. I get a Soul Ring so that I can play a Crucible so I can replay a land. So I still have forbid up. And I believe my opponent tries to make another play on their turn, and I forbid it with buyback. They're not quite getting the message. And I think that's the point where they concede, and that's why this bugged out at the end here. But yeah, I asked him, is forbid causing you a significant emotional event? Because after the forbid play earlier was when my opponent just griefed me for about, well, you can see almost a full 10 minutes, right? So a uncool opponent, and I blocked them and reported them. All right, so next game was Chavez or Chaves. I assume Chavez, and or Chavez, depending on how you pronounce it. Slimefoot the Stowaway is their commander, and I've got a stellar keep. I'm going to run this out like so. I'm one white away from brought back. I can ramp if I choose to. So I could go land brought back here, but I decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get Duretti working. And if my opponent doesn't kill Duretti right now, then I can use brought back to make sure that they don't really have a solution to Duretti down the road. My opponent just looks at the board state and decides to give up, however. So, oh well. I also had Fabricate. So what I was planning to do here was just like Fabricate for possibly a Expedition map and then not play it, plus up the Duretti, and then on the next turn I play the Expedition map, go get, and then do something like play the Expedition map, and then at the end of their turn sack the map, go get Throne, sack the Delta and the Scrubland, brought back the land and the map, so then I would ramp up and be able to go get a Wasteland or whatever it was that I wanted. At that point, I mean, it's pretty much a good game, but my opponent did not allow me to get to that point, so no need to worry about it. Anyway, Snappy Mage here. It's my final opponent for the day, and he's playing another round of this garbage Torban, and I'll show you how bad this card is if you haven't already picked up on it, how my disdain for the card, because here you will see where my opponent has an opportunity, multiple opportunities. He's like laying some early beatdown and stuff, and I'm taking some damage, and I'm missing mana drops, and it's going pretty poorly for me overall. But hey, I will steal this guy here and stop some of the damage. This Impact Tremors deals damage to me whenever a creature comes into play on my opponent's side of the board. I draw Necrobotans. That's not exactly what I want to see here. So not going great, but I do have a mana drain and an impulse up. And then my opponent could play their commander, but decides not to. Why? Because their commander's terrible. Tries to Wheel of Fortune, and that powers up my mana drain. And I'm going to use that mana to play in Urza, because I need more mana. Impulse into a Flooded Strand and pass. And here's my opponent with their turn. Again, has an opportunity to play their commander, looks at the board, looks at their commander, realizes that their commander is useless trash, and concedes. Except, in reality, I don't think this person realizes their commander is useless trash. I did say to them something. I said, I don't think I see Torban everywhere, and I don't think he's all that good. An opponent says he's amazing if you can set up, if you can set it up. And I was like, everything fits the description of amazing if you can set it up. And he's like, not necessarily. Well, cards that aren't good when you set them up are called useless, garbage. Cards that are good when you set them up are called everything. Like, there's no different. Pick a card and, I don't know, pick a card, name a card, and then say, well, if I can set this up, then yes, well, that's true. But what I mentioned to them is, cards that are good are cards that do the setting up for you, right? You want cards that do the work for you. So incidentally, that moves me into the last little bit that I saved for the end here, which was the Highlander Games, and we'll take a look at the Highlander Games here. So I have an old school deck that I've never actually been able to play, and can't play old school online because there's no way to play Chaos Orb. But anyway, so here's my Highlander deck. It doesn't have quite. I think I've got Bolt in here instead of Flame Slash, although that actually probably should be Flame Slash in retrospect, I think. Although, no. Oh, so the reason I have Bolt in here is because in Highlander you only have 20 life. Life total does matter, and I've actually got, Grim Lavamancer, Lightning Bolt, and Deathrite Shaman, all of which can repeatedly ping you can Lavamancer and Deathrite your opponent for quite a bit of damage, and you can bolt them down and finish them off pretty quickly. So actually Bolt makes more sense in here. So there's a lot of stuff. There's so much going on here. I talked about it in my last video. But basically, this is Canadian Highlander. There's a point system. You kind of have to Google it. But under the point system, this is a 10-point deck. All decks should be 10-point decks. You want to use your points. You spend your points by playing cards that have point values. So, for example, Library of Alexandria is, I believe, a 1-point card. So it cost me 1 point to put Library of Alexandria into my deck. So I put it in my deck. So it's like that. Strip Mine, for example, is 2-point cards, which is really weird because it's a defense against a 1-point card, and your defense costs more than their offense, which means that the offense is favored, which is really strange. But anyway, so this is the build that I have. Now I had, in these games I'm playing against him, I think at one point in my last video I had a lot more, I had like a Fast Bond and some other stuff, I think. I was trying out different things, and Fast Bond in particular is a card that fits the exact bill of what I was describing. It's really good if you can set up, but it doesn't actually help you set up in and of itself. Like, it does let you play your lands faster, but that's if you have something else. By itself, it doesn't actually generate cards or mana, and it doesn't kill anything, so it's basically not a good card. Anyway, so this is the build. You actually see Breya is in the deck, hiding over there, because you want life gain in this build. What I haven't had is enough games against aggressive decks to know how good this is, but I put Breya in as an extra source of life gain as well as the Deathrite. We've got a lot of cheap interactive removal to deal with a lot of the early threats. There's an incredible number of synergies and a lot of powerful board states you can get. Now, when I played against 5-color bad stuff here, which is my opponent's name for the next few games, I did not have, I don't think, Chrome Mox and Mox Opal in here, but I later realized that I felt like they should be in the deck because of a number of different reasons. First of all, if you're going to run an Opal, and you really want to run Opal because it's an incredible ability, like just a Mox Sapphire that also happens to be a Jet, Pearl, Ruby, and Emerald. You need as many artifacts as you can cram into the deck. Chrome Mox is in here for the speed. There's a lot of turn 2 plays. I actually had a Dark Confidant in, which wasn't in at the time. I think I had Sylvan Library. But there's a lot of plays that you want to play, and I'll show you examples right here and here and here and here and this one right here. So there's a bunch of examples that if you have a early Mox Diamond or Chrome Mox, your start is very aggressive and scary for your opponent to deal with, or at the very least, did I just take that card out? Quiet Spec, Jace, search for Escanta. Yeah, oops. How did I do that? That's weird. Didn't mean to double click on it. Anyway, so what I was getting at though is if you can go first turn on any of those cards, you're pulling ahead in the game already, and so that's a problem for your opponent, obviously, and good for you. So you want to play cards like that. Also, mana drain on turn one is very, very good. I guess you can include that, and then there's a few other cards that are pretty decent, but also artifact mana and balance. Balance is a 1-point card, so you can run that in here as well. And Chrome Mox's drawback is less of a drawback when you run a card like balance. But finally, I'm also running a 1-point card, which is hiding over here, and that card is this doozy, Tolarian Academy, which also wants lots of artifacts and also wants them cheap. And if you have a Tolarian Academy draw, you can actually go something like Academy, Mox Opal, Chrome Mox imprinting nothing, and you actually have 2 blue up on turn 1, which is pretty good. Or you can imprint the Chrome Mox, and then you've got 3 mana up on turn 1, which is really good. And if you, in theory, I suppose you could do something crazy like this. You could go boom, 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 and imprint the Chrome Mox, and then cast cast Jace on turn 1, right? So living the dream. But the important thing is that you've got cards that work really well together, that work along with the format, which is a little bit of a slower format, because the real Moxes, Soul Ring and Crypt and stuff cost so much mana to use. I mean, so many Highlander points to use that for the most part you're not going to see them too often, and so better to be the fast deck in a format that's slow. Deathrite is just a 1 mana Mox most of the time because it taps for any mana of any color quite often, and that's the other thing with the Mox Opal and the Deathrite and stuff, is being able to tap for mana of any color, very valuable in a 5-color deck. You notice the only green cards, however, in this version are Flashback Ray of Revelation, Flashback Ancient Grudge, which is hiding over here, and Deathrite Shaman activations for gaining life and removing graveyard abuse from your opponent's options and depowering their Lavamancer and stuff like that. So that's it for green, but it is a 5-color deck technically, and pretty cool. And you can even play this off of black. So really, and you can play these 1 time down. So although it is 5 colors, the 5th color is sort of it's present, but not too bad. So the mana base is over here. So you can see it runs triple island. It runs 30 lands instead of 29. You need a little bit more. There is all of the lands in Breya that you could use to go get any color with your fetches are here, and then you don't have the ability to go get green off of every single fetch land. However, there is 1 Savannah which you can tithe for, and you can get with some of your fetches, and there is exactly 1 Tropical Island which you can get with some of your other fetch lands. So as a result, all of your fetches, while they can't all get these lands, it's actually not that hard to get them, and you only need them for Deathrite Shaman activation or flashback on those 2 cards. So you're in a really good shape. You've got tons of ways to produce mana of any color, and so Weather Wayfarer and Expedition Map are more deadly in this deck because not only do you have Throne of the High City, but you also have Library of Alexandria. The one thing that I don't have in here is Cephalid Colosseum, so I cannot put together the Colosseum Narset combo, which is unfortunate. And I'd really like to have Colosseum in here, but the problem is I want to run Land Tax Scroll Rack in here, which I have for a number of reasons. Tax fuels up Library, it fuels Ivory Tower, it works in conjunction with Zurin Orb. There's just a lot of really good things to say about Land Tax. Obviously, it combos with like Jace and stuff. It works well with Dak Faden. Scroll Rack, just a generally strong card that has certain cards that it combos with, land tax being one of them, but also realize that you have quiet spec in here and a couple of other cards that are situational. So you don't really want, sometimes like you want to be able to scroll rack, like say Ray, Grudge, Deep Analysis over here. You want to put them back into your deck and then immediately quiet spec them into your graveyard. So you've gotten new cards. And so that ability is a little bit more important, I think, with scroll rack, but it's also a second way to make the Dark Confidant good. We've got Sensei's Divining Top and scroll rack to, because Dark Confidant, this is a 20 life format. It's a lot riskier. So there's that. And I guess because I want to run land tax, I'm not running the Coliseum. But the other reason, because there just isn't a 31st land slot. But the other reason is that with Coliseum dealing damage to you, I don't want, like you can't afford to take too much damage in 20 life format. So that's another reason not to play it. And as a matter of fact, I'm not running City of Brass and I'm not running Mystic Confluence. So as you can see, there's no City of Brass, no Confluence, and there's also no Command Tower, of course, because it doesn't work in this format. City and Confluence, I felt like were, with all the fetches and the fixing, I felt like I can get the colors of mana that I need. I don't need to deal all this extra damage to myself off of those lands. And they've been replaced by upgraded to Library of Alexandria and Tolarian Academy. So I think I'll be all right. You know, that's what it comes down to. All right, so we'll run these games, and then that's going to be it for the day. Oops. This is how we're going to get to it. The build is a little bit different than it was when I played 5CBS, but hopefully you'll enjoy it anyway, and I'm looking forward to the next chance that I have to play some Highlander so that you can see this version in action. But in the meantime, you can see I have Sylvan Library instead of Dark Confidant, unfortunately. But I do have a first turn Deathrite Shaman here. Now, no commanders, so and 20 life, so remember that. All right, so, but, of course, active ballots, that's so yummy. Anyway, my opponent leads off with land tax, but because I'm able to use Deathrite Shaman, I can actually play the Sylvan here. Wouldn't it be much, much better as a Dark Confidant? Yes, it would. Although, you know, balance doesn't play nicely with Confidant, but still. All right, so instead of drawing 2 cards here for, it would have cost me 2 life, I instead draw 3 cards, but it cost me 8 life. I run out Talisman of Creativity. I could grudge away the Grim, but because I found a mana drain and I can mana drain here, I'd rather have my opponent run out a big play, and then I'll grudge that. Instead, nothing happens here, so I go ahead and run the grudge on the Grim. And my opponent just expedition maps and goes and gets a land. A mana producing, color producing land. All right, well, don't have Dark Confidant running, but I do have Sylvan, and I have Sylvan Tower, so I'm actually going to start gaining life, and so that I can convert that life into cards at some point. But meanwhile, I hold a land because my opponent could play, if I play a land, my opponent can land tax by sacking their land and failing to find, and I wasn't quite ready for that just yet. But finally, I get to this point in the game where I'm like, you know what? First of all, I don't mind you sacking a land because it puts another charge on my Deathrite Shaman's ability to tap for mana. And in the meantime, if you want to do this and set yourself down a land and play in order to get extra lands in hand where they're not going to do you any good, I'm not too disappointed. Instead, my opponent plays a Library of Alexandria. That kind of sucks for me. He's never used it before, and he was thinking that he could just use it, I think, and he accidentally taps it for mana and ends up forced to play the Voltaic Key, I think. So, oops. But didn't realize that you can use it on my turn. That was the problem. So he couldn't figure out how to get down to 7 cards and didn't realize he could use it on my turn because he's never used a library before. So can't blame him, but he did miss out on drawing. He could have just went land, play the key, or not play the key, discard, and then draw on my turn instead. Now he has to draw. He draws in response to his land tax. You can see I'm just trying to get my life total up and my mana base set situated, so I'm just not doing anything at all. I've got Grudge. Of course, I could grudge a key, but unless I see a reason to do it, I'd rather save Grudge for some other target. At the end of my opponent's turn, I attempt to Cryptic their library, and it works. And my opponent has to discard a ton of cards, so I'm going to go ahead and gain some life off Tower. I find a Wasteland, so that'll be for that library in a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and play a Sword of Feast and Famine because I've got Force of Will here, so I'm going to go ahead and push. And I connect, taking my opponent down to 6 cards in hand, which should make it a little harder to use library, except for the fact that land tax, well, refills the hand. So, bummer. I wish I had bounced the tax in some sense instead of the library, but that's fine. All right, so opponent gets the library up. Library's on his turn again. Big mistake. Needs to be using it on my turn. We talked afterwards, and I explained that he can use it on my turn because that would insulate him against Sword of Feast and Famine. Now I'm just going to turn his library off by attacking. Well, of course, as you know, I have the Wasteland here, so it didn't matter in the long run, but anyway, I pay some more life with Sylvan because of the tower having charged me up a bit. Playing Urza, I am going to get around to what I need to do, but first I'm going to go ahead and play a Crucible here. Force to protect it, I think. Or no, tap for 2 blue. I've got Urza running, so I can do this. Smash in. Get all my lands back. Okay, now we can kill the library if I want to. However, my opponent has run so many cards out that they're actually down to so few cards in hand that I'm actually able to, I get mana off the mana drain, of course, so I'm going to go ahead and set up this way. And I do kill the library just for safety's sake, but because of the land tax. And then it turns out he's got no lands to tax for because he overtaxed, which is something I advise against. Don't overtax. Just tax your hand to full, calculate how many cards you'll play that turn, end each turn without discarding, and you've gotten the correct number. Unless you just have 7 cards in hand, none of them are lands, and then you have to overtax. Anyway, so he had actually taxed out all his basics, which theoretically improves his draw phase, but honestly, wouldn't he rather have 3 more lands in his hand right now? For sure, right? A full hand of 7. Anyway, I just play Dak Faden here because I need to spend mana before combat, and then I need to attack. But also, what I'm going to do is, if you add it all up, I play Dak Faden here, I steal Voltaic Key, and then I equip Skull Clamp. And what ends up happening is I've stolen Voltaic Key, so that construct becomes a 7/7. I equip Skull Clamp, so it's 8, and then 9, 10, 11, 12, and I get attack for lethal. So I guess I could have done it without. For some reason, I was thinking he was at 12. I don't know why, but anyway, yeah. So or maybe I was just gonna steal the key and not equip Skull Clamp and just swing in that way. So that I had extra blue mana untapped for hardcasting Forest. So I don't know, off of Urza, right? But anyway, that's game 1, and so game 2, these are matches now. I had a few other like cards. For example, the you saw the blue black, the flyer. All right, so not great to draw Zuran Orb so early unless you're under. Well, unless you have a balance to combo with it, or or a academy or something along those lines. But anyway, opponent gets a Sylvan Library, also not great for me. And decide against going for Tithe. Tithe does make Zuran Orb a little bit more interesting, and instead I'm going to go Stoneforge into a Sword of Feast and Famine. What I'm going to try to do is pressure my opponent's life total to punish him for using the Sylvan as best as I'm able. Opponent that has a Wasteland there, so I go ahead and gain 2 life off the Zuran Orb. It's unfortunate. But I do have white off the top, which I just play untapped using the 2 life that I just spent. And now I've got the potential to Tithe here, but I also can activate Stoneforge and sneak that sword into play. All right, so my opponent does pay some life there and fetches, but does nothing else. And so I'm going to go ahead and try and sneak that sword out. It lands. So draw for the turn, and I attempt to Tithe just to see what I'm working with here. I go ahead and get some mana and equip and swing. Is it going to connect? Opponent has Thirst for Knowledge, so yes, it is going to connect. Discarding a Grim Monolith, so it's up to 7 cards, back down to 6, and my opponent's life total is at threat. I'm going to go ahead and run out Trinket Mage here, and I believe I'm going to get a Mox Diamond. Sensei's Divining Top, right? Because I need to get, there's no Breya, right? So I can't just go get Skull Clamp and assume that I'm going to refill my hand. So I go get Sensei's Divining Top to look for ways to do that. Opponent's trying to Vampiric Tutor his way out of this and Gitaxian Probes into whatever the card was that he selected, which turns out to be Dak Faden. Unfortunately, Dak Faden now, if he Dak Fadens and steals a sword, it's still going to get hit. So 3, 4, 5, and have to discard. Um, and I'm going to bolt him. And because he used a get probe, he knows I have the bolt, which will finish my opponent off. And this is what I meant about the 20 life format. So he actually has to steal Zern Orb in order to stay alive, which of course is not an enviable position to be in. All right, so I'm going to, since he's divining top, you can see there's a fast one there. It's totally useless garbage here. So I'm going to go ahead and steal the Force of Negation. I'm using top tricks right now to shuffle with the top activation on the stack so that my next turn is more precisely what I want to find. I'm going to attack in, and my opponent has to use Zern Orb. I send both face because I'm trying to kill as many of his lands as possible. And then he gushes, which I think is suicidal. Picking up all those lands means my opponent's not getting in this game. I go ahead and just bolt them right now, so that there's pretty much no way of getting back in this game whatsoever. And my opponent realizes that and concedes. Just no mana sources, right? This isn't a format where you can bounce your or gush your way into a bunch of moxes and stuff. So, um, all right. So moving on, got the next game here. Or the next match, I should say. And you can see I had a fast one draw and I mulliganed it again. Fast one was in here. It was an experiment. There's a combo with fast one. Fast one, Crucible of Worlds, and Zern Orb gets you infinite life and mana because you sack a land for 2 life, you put it into play for 1 life, tap it, sack it for 2 life, put it into play for 1 life, tap it, sack it, and you just keep doing that. However, all of my form, I don't have all of my tutors, right? I don't have Vampiric, Imperial Seal. I don't have Enlightened Tutor. I don't have Mystical Tutor. So I don't actually can't put the combo together reliably. So my opponent, by the way, forced a negation a Chromatic Lantern, which was very painful for me right there, actually. That was actually a good play. Excuse me, force and negation it with a future sight, but so it is nice that I'm not threatened by that. And then has a tithe the refill off. He 2-for-1s himself and then refills, draws 2 cards. So actually, I feel like I'm losing this game right now. I go ahead and impulse into a Merchant Scroll. I'm going to try to get something useful with it. But we'll see. Are we going to bug? Oh no, are we going to bug out? We are going to bug out. That's disappointing. Do you see anything that happened here? Yeah, so the only part that's accurate here is that my opponent kept missing land drops and I was able to get ahead. Merchant Scroll into like a mana drain. My opponent's stuck on mana. Eventually I play Lingering Souls. Then I flash back to Lingering Souls and then I'm ascending in like 4 points per turn. And, well, he's stuck on 3 mana the whole time and I have a mana drain up the whole time. It's basically over. All right, so anyway, I have to mulligan here, obviously. And mulligan twice, as a matter of fact, into this hand. And I really hope that the Spellseeker can get something going here. My opponent's got a really good start. So I decide I'm going to strip mine their Cavern of Souls because there's always a chance with the start that my opponent has that they can't do exactly what they just did. Unfortunately, he does hit a second land drop and does make a play, Stoneforge Mystic. He had named, I can't remember what he had named, but it was a tell, and I knew that I had a feeling that he had the Stoneforge, so I was trying to stop it. But the card he tutored for was not Batterskull, but rather Umazawa's Jitte. So I go ahead and do this, thinking, he's going to use the Stoneforge Mystic here, and he does. But I'm trying to protect Jace, right? So I'm going to go get Ancient Grudge. So I'm going to go get Ancient Grudge, and I'm going to attack his Mox and his Jitte. Notice he's missed some land drops here. So it decides not to equip there, and I decide not to cast because I'm waiting, and I'm hoping that I don't get Batterskull. Like, if he just draws Batterskull, it gets to surprise me. He does find some mana here, so I'm going to take a little damage, but obviously, like, he's sitting on a counterspell, but when he goes for Nature's Claim, I have to push it. I go for the claim. It gets negated as expected. I flash back and kill the Jitte. Now I've got to kill the Jitte because otherwise I can't get this Deathrite Shaman that I drew into play. I think at the time, I did have City of Brass, as you can see, which has later become other lands. I think in this case it works out fine. But you can see I have City of Brass and Mana Confluence both not in my list at present. So I go ahead and attempt to counter a Deluge here because I actually need that Shaman to get Jace on board, and when my opponent gushes and destroys 2 of his lands from the board effectively, I realize I probably got this win. And I go ahead and play Jace, and Jace into some land, and I'm going to shuffle away the rest that I don't want. And at this point, it is pretty much done deal. My opponent does get to kill my Narset, which is unfortunate with the Thoughtseize, gets to counteract that, but I'm going to shuffle away the 2 cards I don't want again. And from there, I get to Jace into these. I'm going to run out a Merchant Scroll for a mana drain. I spent a 1-point card to tutor up a 1-point card. That's exactly why Merchant Scroll's in there. This is also a 1-point card, so 1 point, 1 point, 1 point. Notice this is a 1-point card. This goes and gets it. This goes and gets it. The other 1-point cards I have are Balance and Mind Twist, and Spellseeker gets them all, so I am definitely playing Spellseeker as a point. All right, so I'm just being cautious here. Perhaps overly cautious, but I do clear my attack step, and I'm going to attempt to run out Deck Faden. Sticks. Let me see if I can steal the Mox. It happens. Now I'm sitting on Mana Drain, so next turn I can go Sword of Feast and Famine. Yeah, it's pretty much over now. It's just a matter of getting it done. I'm going to go ahead and start dinging my opponent for 2 life with the Deathrite Shaman as well. Chasing away a Rave Revelation, plussing and throwing it in the garbage so that I can flash it back later if I need it. I'm going to play the sword, equip sword, and smash. Getting real bad for 5-color BS over there. He does choose to block here, protect his hand and his life total. I think that makes sense. But of course, and not give me all that mana back. Draws a Wasteland, so gets to waste me there, but the Deathrite Shaman Mox means I can still mana drain. So when my opponent tries to make a play here, I can just counter it. And he does, I think, counter back. But the problem, of course, is he's going to get the mana drain after combat. And then I mentioned that to him, how you should declare your attack step first. And then even though he gets the mana drain after combat, it's not really doing a lot of good there. I'm going to go ahead and flashback Lingering Souls, smash for 3, untap all of my mana. I am not going to flashback Lingering Souls here because if I get Balanced or Wrath, I need to be able to continue to pressure with the Sword of Feast and Famine. So if my opponent were to clear the board here, Deathrite would exile Mind Twist most likely, or Gush or something, so that I could take my opponent down to 1. No more fetches for him. Say he clears the board somehow, land, Wrath. So I take him down to 1. And on my turn, I flashback Lingering Souls, equip Sword of Feast and Famine, and that's assuming Jace and Dak don't find me a win. So that game was over. Was that game 1 or game 2? I don't remember. We'll start game 2, and then if it was game 2, we'll cut it and move on to the next one. Yeah, okay, so that was game 2. All right, so game 3, you can see I had Collective Restraint in there. It turns out not to be, I don't know. I'm back and forth on it. It became Breya. So, all right, another hand where I have Sylvan instead of Dark Confidant, which is, I'd prefer to have Dark Confidant. But anyway, starting off here, I do get to at least fetch up a Savannah into land tax. And it gets pierced, so no taxing for me, unfortunately. Land tax Sylvan is a sick little combo just because you get to look at new cards every turn. While it's running, at least. All right, so I'm going to go get blue-black and run out the Sylvan. And Sylvan, against a deck that's almost all control, is pretty powerful. Opponent then has Weathered Wayfarer, also extremely good. As I've said many times, Weathered Wayfarer often just beats you, right? I'm going to go ahead and play Lingering Souls and pass, so this way, because I have a Sylvan, I don't want my opponent pressuring my life total. And then he trades in. I don't understand this whatsoever. Trades in there. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. That decision does not Does not make sense. All right. Anyway, because Weather Wayfarer is such a threat, like keeping me from being able to play lands. Anyway, so I am going to play land here and then just pass because I want to. The top cards in my library, I don't like them, so I want to impulse past them. But my opponent counters my impulse. Another play. We talked a little bit. I didn't. There's just some things that I just didn't agree with in this. Anyway, I pay 4 life to get past some of those cards. Play a Sylvan and a Search. I'll mill off the cards I don't want now. So much deck control. You can see, though, how much better a Dark Confidant would have been than a Sylvan. I get duressed for a Muddle, but Sylvan's still doing the work that I needed to do. I'm going to dump Balance. I don't need it. Flip the Escanta. Go ahead and Sylvan into some cards. Attack and pass, and now I can Escanta. I can Escanta and start drawing extra cards, and I can clear off the top of my library. Another combo with Sylvan, of course. All right, so I take an Ancient Grudge so that I can attack that Thought Vessel and anything else that might come down later. Pick up a Force of Negation, still missing some land drops. And done for the turn. Okay, some opponents going for a Deluge on 1, which I don't care about at all. Glad to see Deluge gone. Armina Escanta still looking for mana. I'll take the Talisman, and there's got to be some mana. Oh, look at that. Tolarian Academy, the mana source. So I play that, play the Academy, and I'm good. Now I can Escanta and top if I want to, but top's pointless with Sylvan. Again, replacing Sylvan with Dark Confidant means top and Dark Confidant are incredible together, whereas Sylvan and Dark Confidant are just, whereas Sylvan and top are just redundant together. All right. So, of course, I want the Mox Diamond because it's 2 mana sources, actually, thanks to Tolarian Academy. I'll get the Force Will in my hand in a moment when I Escanta it up. And Escanta being so good that I don't even need to Throne here. I think I do eventually use it. I'm going to go ahead and take Force of Will and then, yeah. Oh, that's right. I'm going to attack my opponent's mana base a little bit. He's getting a little bit too much mana. I don't want him to have the option to make more plays than I can counter. I'll go ahead and play Scroll Rack here because it represents mana source with the Tolarian Academy. Sack the Throne of the High City and pass for the turn. I'm off Escanta for a moment, but it's okay. Somehow I'll manage to win this game, I think. All right. I think I Scroll Rack. I don't remember why I Scroll Rack here, but obviously would be a useful thing with a. Oh yeah, I was just trying to get some land. I don't exactly know what I'm doing here. I'm not sure why I put that land away at all. I guess. And I don't have Mox Opal in this version. I don't remember what I had. So but I go get Ivory Tower, right? Yeah. I have no idea why I put that land away. That was silly, obviously. So I end up having to ditch a land here. My hand is very blue and very Escanta. I don't know what that is. Anyway, so I just take a Serum Visions because it's cheap. I'm going to go ahead and grab 4 life for the turn. And, of course, I can pay 4 life. Yeah, I had Teferi's Mode in here. Card that I could still end up playing, but for now is not in. I shuffle away all those cards. I'm digging for lands. Yeah, I draw a Tree Speaker. I was trying a lot of different things, experimental things. All right. So I just run out Tree Speaker. I run out. I Scroll Rack for 1 so that I can pick up the Talisman, play the Talisman. Just remember, I got to get down to 6 cards each turn because of the Throne of the High City. All right. So to 7. I mean, I'm letting this run, but honestly, like the game is super over. Opponent just uses removal on my little Soul Ring there. It's kind of not mattering anymore. I'm going to go get a Lotus, grab 4 life. Find myself a workshop that I can use to play the Lotus. So now I'm really jacked up on mana, and then finally he has this game too. All right, yeah, we're done. Anyway, so obviously, like at that point, I'm going to Lotus, I'm going to play Urza, and then I can tap my Ivory Tower and my Scroll Rack and everything, my Sensei's Divining Top all produce mana. I get an extra creature who I can tap to produce mana. Academy would then produce even more mana. It's just dumb, right? So we move on to game two. I think I'm pretty well, anyway, pretty sure that that could have been scooped up a little bit earlier, but honestly, I didn't mind at all. It's always fun to play. All right, so I've got a pretty sketchy keep, but I'm going to run Throne out. Unfortunately, I have to kill my Wasteland, and I'm going to try to use Jace to dig up exactly what I need. Oh, welcome home, son. Thank, thank you very much. Thank you for the coffee. That was very nice. All right, so as you can see, I'm disrupting my opponent's mana base a little bit. He does get a Weathered Wayfarer out, which is a huge threat typically, but obviously not so much against a person who's already missing land drops. All right, so I'm able to convert a Muddle to Mixture here. I hang on to the Mox Diamond for a little bit longer because I realize I might need to. It's a way for me to play a land, quote unquote. It's a way for him to get more mana and play without feeding his Weathered Wayfarer. But at some point, I realize I'm just gonna forget about it, and you can see I've got the Baleful Strix in this version still. And run out and throw it away because I don't have the lands that I need to feed it. Opponent goes for the throat. My Shaman, who's already done some work for me. And he's still missing land drops, so I'm going to go ahead and run out of Shackles, steal the Wayfarer in just a moment. But I get him and misses the Vindicate, so now I get to, does hit his land drop for the turn, but yeah, I get to fetch here and Vindicate away a Underground, steal the Weathered Wayfarer so that the fact that I'm ahead on mana shouldn't matter. And then, of course, with Jace, I get to flashback the Vindicate and nail some blue mana over there, play land for the turn, swing in, and start the 1-1 beatdown. And finally, 5CBS gives up on that slight advantageous board there. Hopefully, is going to find myself a skull clamp. And this is the end of the video here. We've got a few more games, and then we're all set. I'll run the one that I win, and I'll do the one that I lose at the end. So I win this one, and then the last one will be on a high note for a 5-color bad stuff in which he beats me in a match. So we will run through this. But in this one, as you can see, I force a will the bird early. I decide that I can actually attack my opponent. My opponent mulligans, or it went first rather, so he's down on cards, and I think I've got so much mana and so little else to do that I can actually go after my opponent. So I'm going to go ahead and play Wayfarer and run out. I drop the Zoran Orb because if my opponent doesn't give me the ability to use the Wayfarer, I want to force the issue, and I don't want him to be able to duress that out of my hand. And then on my turn, I do exactly that. I tap for white, eat some mana. My opponent Viscera Seers for some reason. Then I go ahead and Wayfarer, and I'm going to go grab myself a Workshop into Lantern play. And I'm in a much stronger position than I was. Opponent kills my Wayfarer, finally gets out of that, but he's done his job, and look at that, top deck and Academy into Chase. And it is off to the races. Now you can see why I won. I managed to hide a land and Teferi in case I do get himmed. Opponent has Putrefy, kills my Lantern, which sets me back 3 mana sources, which is brutal. It's very strong play. But I do Jace into more mana, of course, that's what Jace does, and I get to shuffle away cards I don't want, as well as setting up my graveyard. I decide to keep balance. I get Ray, Grudge, Deep. That way if there's something like Sylvan Library or whatever, I've got a solution in the graveyard. Opponent gets a tracker here, though, and starts generating some extra cards. Double Clue, as a matter of fact. So for my turn, I just float some mana, sack all of my cards, and balance. Choosing to keep just Teferi, and now I've got Jace running and mana floating that I can use to play a Vedalken Shackles. Pass for the turn. The top card of my library I don't want, so I'm going to shuffle that away. And my opponent's down to just one land against this board. Empty-handed me, but with a active Jace. So I go ahead and grudge away one of their clues because I don't want my opponent to refill his hand. And I deep analysis to get cards back into mine. I'm digging for mana, obviously. Failed to find some. Opponent fails to find some of his own, however. And the clock is ticking. I dig again, fail to find some. Play a Talisman of Dominance and pass. I do have a Force of Negation now, so if I don't find any more land here soon, what's going to happen, of course, is I'm going to... So if my opponent plays a land here, I can actually set up land tax with Zern Orb, and then I've got land tax Jace running, which is good game for sure. It's already pretty much over with the Jace running, but tax Jace would seal the deal. Anyway, so we'll run into game 2. I will be in just a moment. We're going to run into game 2, and then we'll run through the games that I lose. I'm running into the... this video's run much longer than I expected, and I've actually bounced against the clock here. So I had to mulligan. My opponent brutalities and impulse out of my hand. Questionable decision. I run out Ivory Tower. Leaving me with balance is very risky when I've already double mulliganed. My opponent's also mulliganed, though, and down to only 2 cards in hand. And there's lots of mana rocks. So this is actually like not... I'm not sure what's going on over there. You could say I had Talisman of Curiosity in here because I had the higher green count, so I figured it made sense. Plays a Spore Frog. Ivory Tower doing nothing, but then this isn't exactly the opponent that I'm towers in there for. I'm able to Dak Faden and steal his Mox. Spore Frog will kill the Dak Faden, but now I get to play a balance, and I'm going to throw away Ray, of course, and play a follow it up with the Jace, and he's got removal for it. It's the last card in his hand. Oh well. But we're playing a top decking war, and I'm up on cards, and I'm up on mana, and I have a Ray of Revelation in the graveyard as well. So pretty good, but he rips Sign in Blood, land, and if I believe draw 2 more. Yeah, Night's Whisper. Gross. And I just top deck land. So I'm not going to hold for every tower. I'll hold 1 card, but I'm not going to hold multiples. Well, Zern Orb. Throw it down. It looks safer in play than it does in my hand. Opponent Abrupt Decays. I don't have. And then Putrefies. Leaving me with just Ivory Tower and the Talisman. I'll go ahead and just play a land and pass. Obviously, if I can draw like a Yawgmoth's Will here, things get insane for me, but so far no dice, no tutors, nothing. I draw Force of Will. I've got a Workshop, still stuck. When I had a Wood Elves. So this is not the same deck that I faced earlier, obviously. This is green-black deck. Runs out a gigantic Protein Hulk. Well, that's scary. I'm going to hardcast the Force to deal with that. And he misses... I think he misses attacking me here. Misses a point of damage. I should be at 11. And I top deck Collective Restraint, which is not actually in the deck, but it was at this time, so I just play it. Why not? And sorry about that. He gets a Sylvan Safekeeper. Excuse me. And then finally, I draw some actual business. This Quiet Spellseeker, which I use to Quiet Spec. And that'll get me a Grudge, that gets me Grudge, Mystical Teachings, and Deep Analysis, which means that I've got a good amount of refill. I could have gotten the 2 1/1 flyer cards, but I decided that I'm not super worried about that. Opponent pays a lot of life to attack in and kill his guy. I'm cool. All right, so I'm going to Grudge and then Brainstorm, and all of a sudden things are getting kind of nice here. Nature's Claim was in the deck. I do think that might be a card for consideration. Opponents, anyway, but for now it's out again. Because it is a life gain card too in a pinch. Anyway, opponent plays Witch's Cottage, which allows him to recur as Protein Hulk. I play a Sword of Feast and Famine. As you can see, it's taking a while for me to get anything going here. I do have the Mystical Teachings in the graveyard, but I'm 1 mana short from flashing it back. Protein Hulk number 2, I've got to counter that. Of course, he can't attack because of the Collective Restraint. He can either attack or play it, but not both. I go ahead and kill his Felwar Stone, just trying to keep him off making big mana plays. And I knew there was a Nature's Claim on top. So the other thing, though, is I go ahead and play Tezzeret here, and I Tez X equals 2, and I go ahead and fetch a Baleful Strix. So that is not in the deck at this time, but kind of a reason to possibly have it in here. And it turned out to work out really nicely here. And opponent entombs Golgari Grave Troll, attacks Tezzeret, or attacks me for 1, yeah. Anyway, no, attacks Tezzeret, and he pays 5 thinking he had to pay the 5, and I explained, hey, you don't have to do that. It's only, Collective Restraint only stops you from attacking me. Anyway, I get a Deathrite Shaman, smash in, and I was thinking, it's so frustrating. I can't Vindicate. My opponent's Sylvan Safekeeper. I can't Treachery anything. I keep drawing these cards that don't work, and I decide I'm going to kill the High Market, because if my opponent, it looks like he's playing a lot of combo, and part of his combo appears to be, getting that Protein Hulk in play. I don't want him to also have a sack outlet that causes me to instantly lose the game. All right, so I'm searching for something to get going here. I go ahead and flash back X is 0 and play a Mox. Attack and float some mana. And then resolve that guy, and I'm super nervous about what could happen here, so I go ahead and flashback Teachings, trying to figure out the right way to do it with my mana. And Teachings from Mana Drain. I can't Swords to Plowshare as the Golgari Grave Troll, right, because of Sylvan Safekeeper. And I go ahead and move over the sword to the Deathrite, but the Deathrite, I can still cast Mana Drain here off of the Confluence and the Deathrite. So opponent doesn't swing in because it's pro-green. And I go ahead and pay some life in order to gain 2 life and exile the Protein Hulk from the graveyard. All right, so now I'm slowly getting to where I feel pretty good about the situation. I go ahead and fetch up a Sensei's Divining Top, take a look at the top, find a Snapcaster, move the sword back over, attack, and make my opponent, of course my opponent has no cards in hand, and then get my mana back. I go ahead and do the old top trick there, putting the top on top, and play my Tolarian Academy and move my sword back over and pass. So slowly digging my way out of this hole. Opponent plays Elves of Deep Shadow. I'm not going to counter that. And opponent is not attacking with multiple creatures, of course, because of Collective Restraint. So during their end step, I go ahead and play Snapcaster and Impulse. And see mostly garbage. I take Lingering Souls, though. And what I was looking at is whether or not I could finish him off. And it turns out I can. I picked up on it after the fact. Deathrite Shaman for 2. Move the sword over. Attack for 3. Deathrite Shaman for 2 win. So was that game 2 or game 1? I think that was game 1. Game 2. And I have to mulligan again. Mulligan again. And I end up keeping this. Oh, no, that was game 2. Sorry, that was game 2. This is where he chose to kill the Impulse instead of the Balance and ended up paying that big price for it. All right, so the 3 games that I end up losing the 5 color bad stuff, and we are done. And I believe this was this blue deck, and yeah, you can see it's already bad news. Like, I'm playing against this blue deck. I do have Nature's Claim, which is good. I've got Tithe, that's good. I've got Wasteland, but I also have Teferi's Moat, which is a mulligan against that deck. And I have Winter Orb, which I'm not even playing anymore. And that's also a mulligan, basically. Winter Orb in a format where you don't have all the tutors and all the cheap mana is not really where I want to be. See, I was thinking like Winter Orb with Collective Restraint would be like a good combo, but it's just not. It's an unnecessary one. You just want to get card advantage. You don't need to do this like kind of prison-y stuff. You can just get card advantage and control and get control that way. So I think this game probably goes all right for me. I can't remember if this is the one that I won. But truth of the matter is, so yeah, my opponent's playing like actually strip mines my wasteland, but he has all fetches, so I can't strip back, which is really clever. So I just target something to make him use it. And I can't do anything yet, so just gonna sit tight. I want to get that 2-for-1 on tithe. Oh yeah, plays a Dark Depths, and then I tithe. I remember how this game goes now. So opponent strip mine my wasteland, and it actually proves to be pretty critical. And I've got all these dead cards. And I clear my attack step, run out of Jace. Opponent has mana drain for that. I just let that happen. That's fine. Because I need a counter to protect myself against whatever the follow-up play is. It's a Crucible, so I'm going to go ahead and attempt to counter that. Opponent lets it happen, plays Thespian Stage, and that's it. So there's nothing I can do here. It's activate Thespian Stage, target Dark Depths, make a 20/20. This is a Highlander deck, 100-card singleton, combos me out with no search whatsoever, and drew the strip mine to kill my wasteland to make sure that it would happen, and I drew dead. So I just lose to random combo. So we move into game 2, and that'll happen. That's unfortunately, if this were not a 20 life format, or if I had just a little bit more life, if I could have Nature's Claimed like an artifact on my side, then I could have played Jace, and I could have surely he would have gone 20 face, and then I could have played Jace and then bounced the card and then won the game. But I didn't have anything to target on my side of the board. So anyway, game 2, I got a Sylvan draw. Opponents got early Brainstorm. And to be honest, I don't think I considered the line with Nature's Claim getting me above 20. I probably should have. I think I was salty. And, that's never good. Opponent bounces my Sylvan, but I just used the opportunity to develop my mana. I'll get the Sylvan down in a bit. I can get more cards, but what I need is mana. Attempt to tithe here because I don't like the top cards in my library, and I do want mana. Dovin vetoes it. Knowing I have the Sylvan, it's a little sketchy unless he's got removal for the Sylvan right now, which he does. Okay, not sketchy at all. And then I go ahead, but unfortunately for him, I'm able to run out Narset here. Pass. And now it's a pretty bad situation. He gets a Stoneforge, unfortunately for me, right? And does get Batterskull, which is correct. I dig some more. I find a Quiet Spec, so I plow that Quiet Spec into anti-Batterskull tech. I'm going to go get some card drawing and some removal. So now I don't have to worry about Sylvan Library, Batterskull, and I can draw more cards in a bit. Runs out of Wayfarer, but of course I'm holding the Zern Orbs. I also have Jace, so I'm just, for tempo purposes, I'm going to play the Jace and bounce this. I'll throw the Orb down just in case I do need to sacrifice a land, in case he does manage to stick to Wayfarer and I can't address it. So go ahead and bounce that again. And this time, yeah, I think we're going to bug out, because I think I land, sack the throne, and I draw an extra card, and then he plays a Wayfarer again, and I can't remember what I do about it, but I think I Yogg-Will, Plow, Sylvan something, and then he concedes. All right, so we're on to game 3, and this is the last one. This is the one I lose. Felt like a more legitimate loss, if I remember correctly. They're all legitimate, though. I mean, it's just, yeah. So I had to mulligan pretty hard, and I mulligan down to just these cards. But this is at least playable, right? Like, I'm in the game, and I'm going to lead off with tap land. I get strip mine. Thank goodness I drew an extra land. I think he was totally right. And then see here, I've got this dead, useless Winter Orb again. Frustrating. So if that card were just a business card, I'd be all right. I run out of Jace. So I'm going to try to turn that Winter Orb into a real card, except he bounces my guy. I'm playing this Brazen Borrower, which I think is not a good card. All right, so I'm trying to run the Spellseeker out. It's kind of a bait card because I assume I'm going to get countered and I need to get the counter out of my opponent's hand. And so I get a mana leak. I mean, I was hoping it wasn't going to be a mana drain, obviously. All right, so I'm going to run the Jace out here, which I think was a mistake. I probably should have played the Duretti and then plussed it up to 4. And then he could have attacked it down to 1 and I could have killed it. But I mean, active Jace is good too because it lets me get this Winter Orb out of my hand that's just clunking up my draw. And I rip a Swords to Plowshares, but unfortunately, my opponent decides to let it hit. But unfortunately, I actually can't play a threat at the same time. I actually flip Jace and throw away an island thinking, well, maybe Winter Orb will be useful at some point. And if nothing else, I can use it as fuel for Duretti. And then he gets a life from the Loam, Strip Mine combo, and that's it. I'm done. So I concede to that. So that was the game that I lost. So hopefully you enjoyed all that. I realize this was the longest video probably that I've ever made, and I do apologize if you stuck around and were not entertained. However, I think if you did stick around, I'm sure you were. If I had editing tools, I would make it faster, but I don't. In the meantime, though, hopefully you enjoyed yourself. And that's all I've got this time. I've got to get going. I've got a birthday party to attend. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.